Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer. Buddha at the Gas Pump is an ongoing series of interviews with spiritually awakening people. I've done hundreds of them now, and if this is new to you and you'd like to check out previous ones, please go to batgap.com and look under the past interviews menu. This program is made possible by the support of appreciative listeners and viewers. So if you appreciate it and would like to support it, even in a modest way, we really appreciate it, and it enables us to put as much time into it as we do, which is a heck of a lot of time. My guest today is Ishtar, whose birth name is Thomas Howell, and Ishtar was recommended to me by a couple of good friends, Sarah Taylor and Susanna Marie, both of whom have been on Batgap, and just based on my respect for them, I just decided to, get to know Ishtar. And so he came to the Science and Non-Duality Conference, and we've had some good adventures there, and came down to Sedona here together. We're in Sedona, by the way, at the home of Nirmala and Gina Lake, both of whom have also been on Batgap. And we're going to be taking some hikes and this and that. But I wanted to interview Ishtar, and getting to know him has been interesting. He is kind of what do they call those people who are really good at a lot of things? Not a polyglot, that's language. Polymath.
Call myself a dilettante.
Well, he's somewhere between a dilettante and a polymath. He on the airplane, he gave me a detailed account of why and how the Roman Empire collapsed. And we talked about all the potential democratic candidates and the strengths and weaknesses of each one. He mainly talked. I don't have such detailed information. He happens to be, at one point, a professional drummer. I was a semi-professional drummer myself, very semi. And he's a gourmet chef, although he says he's out of practice on that. And probably a number of other things, which I would discover if I got to know him better. But he has all these sort of relative interests and areas of expertise. And I say that to emphasize that he's definitely got a foot in the real world, the so-called real world. Because a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today might seem like it all relates to some unreal world, or a world which many people would consider merely imaginary. And so I just want to sort of contrast that with the practical side of him and his life, and just so you realize he's just not a total woo-woo dude, but is very well integrated, I would say. Great sense of humor. We've been joking around about this, that, and the other thing. And anyway, you'll get to know him better as we have this conversation. So, regarding the woo-woo side of it, as you may know if you've watched many of my interviews, I'm very open-minded about the all possibilities nature of the universe. And just about anything anybody were to say to me, I would not necessarily believe it or disbelieve it. I would take it as a hypothesis, which had varying degrees of probability of being true. But some of the things which Ishtar will be talking about are way up on the scale of probably true, in my opinion. My understanding, and to some extent my experience of creation, of life, is that it is multidimensional. There's much more to it than meets the eye. And some people have, and Jesus was always saying, if you have the eyes to see it or the ears to hear it, that kind of statement, which implies that our assessment of the world is very much dependent upon our subjective ability to perceive and understand. That was a big revelation to me when I was about 17 years old. I kind of thought the world was what it was, and then I took LSD for the first time and realized that the world is vastly different for different people according to how they experience it. Went into a donut shop in the morning, and I was kind of just amazed at how the donut selling ladies were probably perceiving the world as compared to how I was at that point. And they had the advantage in terms of being able to function and sell donuts. I don't think I would have been able to just then. In any case, I'm getting a little bit long-winded here, but there are many subtle realms. That's what I'm alluding to here. And there are phenomena that take place in these subtle realms that are happening all around us, in our midst, that the vast majority of us are oblivious to. And certain people, Ishtar being one, have been tuned into these subtle realms, at least some portions of them, ever since childhood, really. And his life has been an interesting adventure of functioning on these levels, these subtler levels, as well as functioning on mundane, practical levels. And it continues to be such to this day. So I'm thinking that in this interview, we'll kind of take a chronological, biographical approach, which we don't always do with interviews. Sometimes I don't talk much about the person's life. We just plunge in and talk about their ideas or their awakening or whatever. But in your case, your life has been so interesting. And from infancy, practically, things you remember and things you did, that I think it would be fascinating to people to hear it in some detail. So let's start as early as you would like to start with anything that began to happen to you as a young child, which perhaps wasn't happening to other kids your age.
Yeah, sure, yeah. And of course, I really had no idea until much later that was the case, that other people were having different experiences, and I didn't particularly...
Yeah, a lot of people say that. They say, I thought everybody saw angels, and then I started talking about it at school, and they thought I was crazy or something.
Yeah, you basically accept the world that you come into. You don't question it a whole lot. But for one, I think the early memories, I didn't know that was odd until maybe my AP psychology course in high school.
Early memories meaning being able to remember.
Being able to remember things, stuff
that
you ought not to remember. I had a lot of spiritual experiences early on, experiences of samadhi that obviously I didn't have any words. I didn't have any words yet. For any of this, I would just sit in my crib and, be sensing that I was in this vast presence. And I loved my mornings. I would get up well before my parents would, before the sun would come out, and I would just sit in my crib and just chill out. And sometimes I would watch my curtains, but they weren't just curtains for me. They had this. They were like a sort of a dancing emanation of this subtle thing that I felt connected to, and it was just very pleasurable. There were these waves of joy and pleasure and appreciation when I would sort of play with this kind of awareness, as I might call it now. And then there were all sorts of other kind of experiences that happened in that little realm of the crib. I think probably I probably met my great grandmother, who was deceased. Of course, with all of this stuff, I was taught that it was that I having an imagination was good. So as a kid, I just put everything in the large folder of imagination, and I think that sort of allowed me to kind of keep those perceptions and not repress them, as I think many children learn to repress them. They're quite sensitive to what their parents say, even offhandedly.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in my crib, and this lady came through the doorway, and that was normal enough. And at first I thought, grandma, but she was shorter than grandma. She had similar curly white hair, and she had a blue nightgown and a white lace collar, and she just sort of walked by my crib, and I was just watching her, and she didn't look at me, but I felt that she kind of was reaching out to me in a certain sense, and I just wasn't afraid at all, and I just watched her, kept watching, and then she did something rather unexpected, which was she walked through the wall of my bedroom, and that got me quite excited. I was like, whoa, like
I'll learn to do that.
Yeah, when I can get out of this crib and walk, I'm going to do that. That was the plan. That was what was going to happen. And a few years later, must have been 3 or something like that. I was sitting on my mother's lap, and we were going through a family picture album. We turned the page, and there was this lady in a blue nightgown with a white lace collar with curly hair, the same face, and I was like, Yeah, and then she's like, "Oh, that's your great grandmother. She would have really loved you."
Oh,
I
so
just know
she
it.
died long before you were born.
She died a year before I was
Oh, a
born.
year, okay.
Yeah, we missed each other by about
Yeah.
18 months, I'd say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So
Neat.
yeah, and that was one of the sort of maybe kind of wanting to be a mystic in some way. She wanted to go into the mystical, but she didn't quite really dive into it.
She did in her life?
In her life, yeah.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I felt a little bit like at least in the family dynamic, that I was kind of picking up in the family somebody else's work, and she was one of them.
Huh,
So
cool.
yeah, yeah.
All right. What's another experience?
Well, we talked about these all before, so I'll have to.
Well, yeah, but
Get
these
them out
people
there.
haven't
These
seen
people
it,
haven't
so
seen it.
you just
Yeah.
pretend you've never talked to me about this
Yeah,
stuff.
of course. Well, I used to have a lot of beings sort of walk into my room as a kid. Later I would kind of throw the label ghosts onto them, or discarnate beings. I think there were various types of beings. There were maybe discarnate spirits. There were beings that were a little bit more what we might call angelic. They had a brighter light about them, and they would kind of come and descend and visit. But the spirits were I think the most frequent visitor as a child. And I wasn't wholly comfortable with it, so I had to sort of do things to kind of protect my psyche. I didn't want to like overload in my nervous system, and so I had at age 6, for instance, I had a really deep interest in Jeremy Brett's Sherlock Holmes. That's the series from the 80s, and I was just obsessed with Sherlock Holmes for a while. And it happened that my mother was also a big lover of Sherlock Holmes, and years before, when she was in England, she'd bought a proper deerstalker hat and a costume, and so
Pipe.
a pipe. I had a pipe, and so I figured, okay, I want to be like Sherlock Holmes, except be maybe kind of psychic and maybe like a Jedi too, and so. And I'll sort of deal with these spirits as if I'm working on their case.
Right.
And so I would, dress up as Sherlock Holmes. I'd turn my room into a sort of like as close as I could make it to sort of a Victorian consulting detective's office. I had to use a lot of imagination there, but I would sit down, and then I would have this being that came and sit down. I would close my eyes. I would go into this vast spaciousness, which I knew, and then somehow I would instinctively project it into the room and put it right where in front of the discarnate being. And when I would open my eyes, the room would feel spotlessly clean. Mm-hmm. And there would be this sort of sense of upliftment in the air, and there would be no more spirit. And this kind of went on for a while.
Like you helped them transition.
Yeah, that was the idea. That's what I was wanting to do.
Was it kind of like the Sixth Sense, where they knew you could see them, and so they came around more than they would come around to another person?
I would say that, and thankfully it wasn't so scary as that movie. Nobody was grabbing my leg from under a bed.
Nobody had their head blown off or anything.
Nobody had their head blown off. Nobody was vomiting green stuff on me or anything like that. It wasn't so graphic and scary. And even there was I kind of was wanting to avoid that in a certain sense. So I would do all sorts of things to try to create parameters about who would come in. Sometimes there were a couple occasions where I would sort of commandeer or strongly request, a spirit to sort of, okay, if you don't want to transition, watch the door.
Yeah.
Watch the door, and if you can, make sure that only one comes at a time.
Yeah, there was one particular guy that you assigned to that task.
That's right. That's right. They were the longest serving
Yeah.
in that function.
Uh-huh. How did you actually communicate with these beings? I mean, was it in English? Was it in just telepathy without any language, or what?
It was both, but it was primarily kind of telepathy without any language.
Yeah,
It was often in pictures and sort of geometric kind of.
But somehow
thought
it would
forms.
encapsulate the message.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I was a particularly good medium, like some people maybe. I kind of broad strokes, maybe not fine stuff. So it was mainly almost a binary. It would break down to like, want to transition, don't want to transition. Like that
Some
was.
of them didn't want to.
No, yeah, you could tell they didn't want
wanted
to.
to hang
so
around.
Yeah.
And then, did you tell any of your friends or your parents about what you were doing?
No,
Or was
not
this
all
totally
that.
a private thing.
Mainly private. Sometimes I think I mentioned it, and it would kind of be like, oh, what a wonderful imagination.
Yeah,
like,
right,
all right, okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so how many years did this go on?
Well, let's see. It was particularly strong at age 3, 2. I mean, actually, it was probably stronger than I thought it was before that, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then at about age 7 and 8, my sensitivity started to become less consistent. I would still feel the things going on, and I think they could sense that I was feeling what was happening.
Yeah.
But I was, I was growing up like people do. I was developing the ego structure. I was falling asleep. And I would say, like, I would even was kind of conscious of that. I would say, like, hey, you can tell I'm getting worse here at this. So like, I don't know if I'm going to be of particular help, and I would rather like to sleep tonight because this gets a little bit nervy for me.
Yeah.
Feeling you over there. So please go.
So you mean they would keep you awake in the past?
Yeah. Well, yeah. My nervous system would kind of just feel
be kind of keyed up from it.
Keyed up and agitated, and it wasn't comfortable to have the hair on my neck be standing up at all all hours, and then having like the sense of sort of like, I don't know, thought forms coming into my like emotional body. I would just feel different things. I'm like, this feeling, I don't think this was produced by this life. Like this is somebody else here. That does not feel like my story.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like it was kind of good that it shut down finally.
Yeah. It would reappear whenever there were periods when I would be more in the presence.
Yeah.
It would just happen that I would be more in the presence, and the clouds would lift for periods, and then the sensitivity would come back. I was like, okay, it's the price you have to pay, because when I would be more in the presence, that life would move much nicer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when it shut down, I guess you told me you told that door guard guy that okay, your time is up. We don't need you to do this anymore. And
he stayed on.
Sort of poignant.
Yeah. Well, he actually stayed on through up until age 17. I still had enough activity.
I see.
After 8 that I kind of wanted somebody to sort of minimize it.
Yeah.
Because the activity I did get, I was worse at dealing with.
Yeah.
And things really sort of shut down when I made a sort of a very big shift in my life, when I decided I'm going to jump into the spiritual path in a very committed way. I'm going to throw my hat into this ring fully, and I basically got rid of most of my possessions and turned my room into a little ashram, and then three mornings in a row together, I had sort of visitations when I was waking up from 3 different spirits, and each one of those visitations was kind of like a goodbye. It played out in the same way. I'd be waking up, and I would, as soon as my eyes would open, I would see a particular being walking towards me. The first one was I think he was Mexican, and he had like a shirt that looked like it was from the 50s or the 70s, some sort of garish colors that they liked in those 2 decades, the certain red and a certain green and yellow or something like that. And he was quite friendly, and there was a sense of like a heart connection. It's like something hit my heart and was like, thank you, we've enjoyed being here with you, and we're going to go now.
Nice.
We're going. And then the second one was a rather stern lady who I'd seen before, and she would freak me out sometimes because she just had a permanent frown on, a scowl, and she was one of those where I after a while I kind of got used to. She has a scowl, but she means well. I could get below that. It's like, okay, instant freak out, but she means well. And she was kind of dressed in what looked like Edwardian wear and had a very tight
kind of like
collar.
the old aunt in Pride and Prejudice. She turned out in the end to be a good egg.
Yeah. And so she left, and then the third one who came to me in a much different fashion. Those 2, I think, were discarnates who might have been bound to the house in some way, or the property, or somehow found their way there. And the third one was a fellow who, I don't know if I ought to call him a demon or just someone who was particularly troubled, but when I met him, he was quite dark feeling, and thankfully I'd had a previous experience where a similar sort of entity had appeared in my room and kind of terrified me, and then a voice from my heart kind of came up and said, just open to love, just open to love. And that seemed the best option at the time, and so that's what I did, and that ran away. And so after that, I knew how to deal with these beings, and this being came to me, and I kind of just off the top of my head said, like, hey, I know your ilk, and guess what? Here's what you're going to do. You're going to watch that door for me, and you're going to do a job.
He became your door guard.
He
yeah.
became my door guard. Did a damn good job at it. That place was really clean. I mean, I think a demon is, or I don't know what he was, but it felt like a he was probably a pretty good door guard.
Yeah, he said it had a certain intimidation factor going.
I had myself my own tough, you know. So that being came to me, and they kind of. It was, when they first came to me, they were like an undifferentiated mass. And I could see no features. I could feel a bunch of stuff. But when they left it was as if they had been taking a shower for 8 years.
Yeah.
And so you could see streaks of other beingness coming through. And that was an especially sort of heartfelt
So it was a real evolutionary time for them.
I'm taking it to be so, because they told me thank you, and they said it just the same as the other. It's been really wonderful doing this, and guess what? I'm going on to, something much better.
Yeah.
And I'll see you later. You don't need us anymore, because once you turn this place into an ashram, a whole different set of possibilities, came into being, and you won't be bothered anymore.
That's great. That's interesting. Okay, so I just want to interject that I think the relevance of this to the whole Batgap theme, which is, spiritually awakening people, and the whole topic of spiritual awakening and spirituality and what's real and what isn't and all that, is that, most people, myself included and many others, most others, are not going to have experiences like this. And that's okay. It's not at all necessary. No one should get the idea that, if they don't have experiences like this, they're missing the boat, or they're not as enlightened as somebody who is having experiences like this, or any such thing. But there's a certain segment of the, quote, the spiritual population, so to speak, who do have experiences like this. And I don't think it's helpful for them to just sort of brush it aside and say, oh, it's just an illusion, or, oh, you have an overactive imagination, as people say. I mean, whatever people's experience, they should be met with kind of respect, and not necessarily complete credulity. We don't have to, some people do have vivid imaginations, and you don't necessarily want to indulge in that. But, many sincere people might be having such experiences, and I've talked to some, and, they were kind of freaked out by it. I mean, Jack O'Keefe, when she first got into spirituality, she was sitting in a pub in Dublin having a beer with friends, had no kind of spiritual background or anything, and all of a sudden she kind of shifted into astral perception. She saw all these spooks in the room. Yeah. And she, as I recall, she ran outside the pub and was like leaning against the wall. Oh my God, what just happened? So.
And one funny thing is, actually, at about age 7, I was having these experiences, but I sort of became a philosophical atheist. And so that was weird, because
kind of a clash of worldviews or something.
Yeah, I thought, scientific materialism, that makes sense, that's but at the same time I was having all these things, and I'm saying, okay, all right.
It's funny that you would shift into that philosophy,
Yeah.
I mean, because obviously your whole life had been about the fact that there's more than materiality to the world.
In my case, it was rather a fad.
Was it a rebellion against all the subtle stuff you'd been experiencing?
I think it was a rebellion, actually. It was more to do with my upbringing, and it was a rebellion against the, what I was learning in history about the history of religions. And
this is at the age of 7 or 8. I mean, when I was 8 years old, scientific materialism or atheism, all this stuff would have been way over my head, and I was just thinking about whatever when I was 8 years old, going fishing and riding my bicycle and playing baseball in the neighborhood, and not particularly liking school or thinking about anything very deeply. So it's kind of cool that you were mature enough to be thinking deep thoughts at that age.
Yeah, I think we kind of hit the ground running in a certain sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was always very enthusiastic to be born and alive, and always had a sense of a real wind at my back, and I wanted to run as fast as I could to sort of keep up with it.
That's pretty neat. I mean, it's worth mentioning that people do come into this life at different levels of evolution with different degrees of spiritual momentum. And if there has been a very strong momentum established in a previous life, that one can just sort of hit the ground running, as you said. And that there, like there's an example of a statement that you don't need to believe this. Certainly don't believe it because I said it, but take it as an interesting hypothesis. You know, you can unwind it. All right, is there such a thing as spiritual momentum? Are there such things as past lives? Do we, carry lessons learned and inclinations reinforced from one life to another? And it's good, interesting to think about this stuff.
Yeah, and I always, once I heard about those concepts, I think I came across reincarnation maybe at age 7 from one of those Time Life book series or something like that. It had deep resonance because I had been thinking about, why do I have all these, why am I obsessed with Abraham Lincoln, for instance, or these moments in history, and then later on, looking back at my life, I had a lot of experiences of going into the silence, just not doing anything to do it particularly. It would close my eyes, and even later between 8 and 13, which was kind of an ego development time, if I got in a real pinch, I would just instinctively sit down, close my eyes, and somehow my awareness my mind would quiet and go into this big vastness. And that was, if I was really frazzled, that's what I would do. So I could come out of that and then just kind of, go about in a more coherent kind of manner.
That is so cool. I mean, it's like you intuitively knew what to do.
Yeah.
And obviously, kind of seems like you probably had that habit in the past.
Yeah. So I think something must have been there, and I would, silly little trivial things like I loved, as many people of my generation did, the Ghostbusters cartoon, and I would get up early in the morning to watch it before the rest of my family. And one day I was watching it, and one of the characters, they were trying to find something, and one of the characters decided to sit down and said the line like, "I know, if you just stay in one place, the whole world will come to you." And when I heard that line, it was just like a I was immediately sent back into this sense of vastness, and my awareness was everywhere, and it rung like a bell like that for the rest of the day. And there was another time I was at a youth camp type thing, and they have you climb ropes and do team building exercises, try to trust people that you shouldn't ever trust with your life.
Right.
And I was doing this thing called the Jacob's Ladder. And something deep inside me when I was doing it just clicked on somehow, like how to do it properly, and it just told me, relax completely, let go into the silence, and so I did, and I ended up climbing it upside down, which was not the way you're supposed to do it, but that was the only effective way to do it, it turns out, and something about that experience sent me into this quiet, and that again, so I had these little moments throughout my childhood that were just kind of reminding me and pushing me in that direction. I just didn't kind of put them at the center, at the central context of my life until a couple years later. Yeah.
The whole story of the Bhagavad Gita is like Arjuna, this great warrior, is about to fight a battle, and unfortunately the armies were arranged such that he had some dear relatives and respected elders in the opposing army, and so he had this moral dilemma. And on the one hand, it was his duty to fight this battle. On the other hand, he, didn't have the heart to fight these people, and so he was kind of in a quandary. And he just sat down in his chariot and said, "I don't know what to do." And Lord Krishna, in a nutshell, after saying many other things, basically said, transcend.
Yeah.
Be without the three gunas, nistatra gunya bhavarjun. And so it's like the solutions to intractable or insoluble relative problems can often be found by taking recourse to the absolute. And it's not like you get down there and say, "Oh, here's a solution, X, Y, Z."
Right.
It's more that you sort of reach a more resolute or fundamental level of functioning or awareness. And from there, spontaneously, the right course of action will ensue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And should I keep going through the life?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about the scientific materialism phase. So did you have it sort of worked out with the logic of it and everything,
Yes.
and you were having little arguments with your friends? And
Well, I kind of found out that not everybody was keen on going through the logical points.
Yeah, a bunch of 8-year-old kids.
And
Boring,
and
dude.
neither was I. I don't think I was particularly had much tact, or I needed to develop
Yeah,
more
you were
tact.
kind of in your face with it.
I think too much, and I wasn't diplomatic enough, and
Yeah.
I just and so yeah, that trouble ensued from that. So I had to learn how to take the gas pedal off of that one, and then for me it was kind of a phase because I started looking at some of these phenomena
Yeah.
in my life and elsewhere that I found interesting, and they seem to be poking holes in the paradigm, as it
Yeah.
were. So
Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics is the paradigm of scientific materialism and how it dominates our society and how it's resulted in so many problems in the
Yeah.
world because of our regarding the world as dumb, insensitive, insensate, matter,
yeah.
whereas really the whole thing is imbued with life and imbued with the self. It's us, and but yet we treat it, put it at arm's length and treat it as dumb stuff. that
look
we
at it
can-
as a resource that we can
yeah,
use.
we can do anything with, and we're soiling our own nest, to say the least. But in any case, and so consequently, I mean, if that is the problem, the solution is to regard consciousness as primary and and as being fundamental and universal and all-pervading and all that stuff. But that's a whole nother discussion.
That was the answer that was pointing me toward, and once
Yeah.
I kind of was, once the probabilities were kind of stacking on that side, on that answer, then my great interest started to be like, well, if that's true, then, how do I experience that?
Yeah.
How do I experience that all the time? I wasn't even thinking about my prior experiences as that.
Right.
They were not crossing.
You didn't put two and two
I did not
together.
put two and two together
Right.
because I kind of thought that maybe it wasn't all that possible in my life. I'm from Wisconsin after all, so what are you going to do?
Cheesehead.
Yeah, Cheesehead. I owned one. They're actually quite useful, but
Yeah.
in their own way. But that became started more and more to become a big interest, and then it became a primary interest after I had a near-death experience.
Yeah.
And that was,
Would that be the next significant point in the
yes,
story?
yeah.
All
That's
right. Why don't we
really
talk about that?
That's kind of the fulcrum on which my life moved.
Yeah.
That was sort of from in my life the great wound and in many ways the great blessing, just together as they so often are. And it involved the death of my mother, and we were in a car accident together.
Yeah.
And it was kind of made a little bit more interesting, to use that word. It was made more interesting by the fact that the day before I'd actually broken my arm playing baseball. I got hit by a real zinger of a fastball, and that was my big complaint. Like, oh, I'm gonna miss baseball season.
Yeah.
And we were standing there in my room just talking to each other, my mother and I, before I went to bed. And like it had happened so many times in my life, I would get these sort of precognitive flashes. They had a certain flavor or quality about them that I could recognize. And only this one, the words came out of my mouth, and it was, "Mom, I have a feeling you're going to die soon." And when it came out of my mouth, really unedited, it hit her.
Yeah.
She kind of something was powerful in it, and then she kind of shrugged. She kind of wiped that off and said, like, I'm going to be around. Rest assured. I will be here for you for a long time to come. And I thought, okay, that's good. Yes.
Yeah.
And then my fears were allayed, and I went to bed. But they came back because the next morning I woke with quite a start, like they do in the movies or the cartoons.
Yeah. Boing.
Boom, like that, just like that, and like gasping, like like I was running, and it was at the moment that my mother and father were walking right outside my bedroom door, which I like to sleep with it open, and
Because you're afraid of ghosts.
I like to have a good escape path. Yeah. Better have it open and have the tough there than have it closed for whatever reason. But yeah, so they were walking past, and somehow there was a clerestory window up there, and some sunshine was hitting them, and that was kind of a mystical moment. But I was distraught. I was like, "There's something I have to tell you. There's something
You
I have to."
actually said that to them?
Yes. Yes. I said, "There's something I've got to tell you to. There's something I've got to tell you, but I don't know what it is." And I was so frustrated. I was so distraught by that. They had to calm me down so that I could go to school, and I had to. It took me about 20 20 minutes to collect myself.
Wow.
And to get my breath down. And I felt as if I just been like the guy at marathon running.
Yeah.
And only the scroll fell out of my pocket somewhere along the way, and it felt like that. And so they calmed me down, and I went off to school, and did the school thing, and came back home, and then we dropped my.
Did you have a cast on your arm by this time?
No, we were actually we were that day we were going to the
get it.
same hospital where we ended up to put a cast on my arm.
I see. Yeah.
So I just had a sling on.
Yeah.
And so I went to school and came back home, and we dropped my sister off at her work, and we were driving out to make a left turn across a divided highway, 4-lane divided highway. And it was one of those situations where you had two cars going 45, and the car that hit us was kind of totally obscured by them, but if they were going the speed limit, they wouldn't have hit us, but instead they were going 20 miles over, or they decided to accelerate at just that time. And we pulled out, and I think actually, funnily enough, my mother was asking me to put the Luther Vandross tape, and I was like, no more Luther Vandross. She loved Luther Vandross. And I was looking over to get it, and I looked to my left, and about, I don't know, 6 feet from where my body is right now was this big Lincoln Town Car or Continental or something like that, right outside the door, outside my mother's
going 60 miles
door,
an hour.
just really booking it.
Yeah.
And in that moment, to me it was pretty clear, like the jig was up.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, shit. I hope I can swear on the show.
Yeah, occasionally.
That was the first thought. I think anybody would have that. And then the next, instead of kind of clenching up, I completely relaxed. And the next thought was kind of from this deeper sort of strata, and it was like, I really thought this one was going to go more than 13 years.
Yeah.
And at that point, the whole sort of what I'd read about and was interested in, the whole kind of life flashing before one's eyes thing happened. And only in this case, it was a little bit richer than the descriptions I had read previously, in that when we went through each, it was a seamless whole, not just a bunch of little fragments, but almost like taking a string and pulling it back and experiencing each part of the string in complete detail. And it was as if I was connected with this sort of completely objective or omniscient part of my consciousness. I had had dances with that part before, but I would often kind of be like, shut up, I'm going to do it my way, and kind of go away, but only there I completely embraced it, and I felt completely embraced by it. And every place where there was tension, every place where I was holding a grudge, every moment where I acted in fear, or I acted out of spite, or anything that was kind of really anything other than love, was just sort of seen completely and then forgiven, and totally accepted, myself and everybody out there, everything. And
so obviously this happened in a split second, but if it had played out in real time, so to speak, it might have been hours to go all the information you went through.
God knows, yeah, it was hyper condensed. I mean, it must not have been. I don't even know if it was a second between when I saw the car and it
probably
whacked
not.
us.
At that
Probably
speed,
not.
it was probably just a fraction.
Exactly, and so it was all there, and it was a very palpable and visceral sensation too. It felt as if, really actually felt as if I had this, my whole life I'd had this sort of like saran wrap, constrictive saran wrap on top of me, and with each sort of forgiving and release and appreciation of the love that was kind of running the show the whole time in my life, there was this sense of it coming down off of my body. And by the end, I was just completely weightless. I had no fear, and even visually, I even remember the dashboard of our Chevrolet, and my mother's shoulder, and all the details of the scene, the clouds that were in the background, the face of the other driver.
He was probably like,
he didn't notice,
really?
until it was really late. He was he was
distracted.
I think he was
way.
probably drunk, but the car, everything seemed to almost reveal that it had this kind of like underlying light underneath it, and there was this sense in my heart that everything was love, and my presence went from a little localized kind of 13-year-old body to just being everywhere. There was a sense that I was everywhere, and I was the whole scene, and I was the whole thing that was happening. And then boom,
The crash.
the crash. Yeah, yeah. And it was quite a crash, and we were pushed a long way, and the car was totaled. And I woke up, came to with the sound of the seatbelt dinghy going off, and my mother's kind of labored breath, and they got out the giant skill saws, jaws of life or whatever, and they were cutting things out, and they were really good. They got that door off quickly, and kind of very professionally pulled me out of the car, and were really concerned that I had spinal injuries and stuff like that, and got us on the gurney, got us in the ambulance, and the whole. I was certainly concussed.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what my name was, and didn't know a lot of those details, but I could say, that's my mom. I don't know anything, but that's my mom. I know that. So I had that. And they put us in the car, in the ambulance, and I had one of those kind of experiences that a lot of people seem to report, where I had both the awareness of being on the gurney and being strapped down, and also this awareness of being everywhere.
Yeah.
And my mother called my name twice, and 2 times I said, "I'm okay, Mom." And the second time she registered it, and it was as if when she was saying those words were happening within my own consciousness, and I could feel her, as the same as my own consciousness fundamentally, and I could feel it when she registered it, and I felt her just go, I felt her leave, and after she did that, her breathing went from this really sort of labored breathing to this really even. Relaxed kind of breath, kind of just winding down. And there I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I didn't know that was her, maybe leaving.
Yeah.
And, then they got into the hospital, and then, heard, from my father, your mother's gone. And of course, that hit like a punch to the gut, the biggest one I've ever had. And, tears and all that.
Sure.
Falling apart on the hospital floor, and maybe being hugged by the Lutheran Social Services people that I didn't want to be hugged from, but I knew they meant well.
Yeah.
And going home, and I still had that big sense of presence, and I just my brain was coming online again. I was thinking, this is shock. This is shock. And then, kind of, life kind of kept going, and all the things that happen when somebody dies so sudden like that, where their family gathered and all of that, and you're going through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages, like clockwork, and it just happened that over that summer, while I was going through all of that grief, and I was also had the sense of this presence that was there, that was weird to me, and at first I thought it was shock, but then when it was after a couple months, I started thinking this is something else, and when I could go into it as if it was a vast dimension, and when I would do that and kind of put my awareness intentionally there, all sorts of joy would bubble up, and like bliss would come out. Like, whoa, why am I feeling joy and bliss when I am so, otherwise at the same time so distraught and so much in the process of grieving. And
now you had the experience before of presence and being able to go into it, and various things had evoked that, but this was different somehow?
Well, it felt in some ways deeper. It felt more raw. It felt more fundamental. And again, I was kind of silly for whatever reason. I wasn't categorizing them together. I think a lot of I knew what I was doing when I was young, and I knew that it was a particular dimension, but it had a different flavor. It seems that when I was 13 than when I was 3 or 5 or 6, and I think at 13 I'd also fallen asleep enough. In grade school, I was trying to be a good intellectual, and become really as heady as I could be, because that seemed like how to be in this world.
Right.
Like you just be a walking intellect.
Yeah.
And so you can fall asleep really fast when you try to do that, And so I think I'd gotten enough. I've distracted myself enough from those things that when this came, it was a big, kind of a wake up call. And
what do you think were the mechanics of how this accident and this trauma kind of kick-started you into a different, more spiritual phase of your life? Was it like a sudden burning off of a big chunk of karma, or was it some kind of shock to the subtle body that sort of unleashed energies that had been trapped and dormant, or what?
I felt it was almost like a prearranged wake-up call. I mean,
Yeah.
it felt so. It had a feeling of being prearranged with my becoming prescient of it beforehand. It had this
Sure.
flavor of oh, this is in the script, you know. And
According to Rob Schwartz, whom I interviewed a month or so ago, who studies, how we plan out our life before we enter into it, any major event like that is prearranged, according to him.
Yeah, and I've read a lot of the literature in his
Yeah.
field, and so I think a lot of it, there are so many accounts similar that it seems to shake out that way.
Yeah.
And it definitely felt, it had that feeling of this is in the script. And I think if I didn't have that happen, I could have lived a really relatively happy life and had a lot of these things on the back burner. And losing my mother not only tuned me into those dimensions again, but again, the wound blessing thing, it left me with this hunger,
Yeah.
a real hunger, because it was a big loss.
Right.
And I was really hungry to kind of fill that hole.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with those things together, there was kind of a desire and direction, to get back to that. And when that sort of sense of presence sort of faded out over the summer until I went back to 8th grade and attempted to be a teenager again. Mm-hmm. When that faded out, kind of after my 8th grade year, which was in some ways kind of miserable.
Yeah.
I kind of had the wherewithal after school was over to go like, geez, I got to get back to that.
Yeah.
Like what was that exactly? I've got to get back to it. I'm going to just try anything to do it. Mm-hmm. And so that over the next few years of kind of maybe wholeheartedly experimenting with maybe half of my time.
Yeah.
Eventually that led me to the practice of meditation and to deciding to throw all in that camp, because I was still trying to be a normal person,
Right.
whatever that was, and I thought I did want to please my family still. That was still there. I didn't want to, I wanted to do some of the things that I used to want to do. I thought like, that's what I used to want to do. I mean, isn't that what I ought to be doing? Like, and so it was kind of a transition process to sort of, there was kind of a crazy monk in me, which that's what I called it. Oh, there's a crazy monk in there. Like, I don't think we should do that, because if we do that, if I open up to that, I have to go 100%.
Yeah.
That was the sense, and that's why I was a little bit like, I got to do things 100%, and everything, the whole ship will be scuttled if I go and open that up. And eventually, it seemed like I have to open it up, because that's what I'm here to do. I'm not here to be a politician. I'm not.
Yeah, you mentioned you had wanted to be what, a politician or an actor or something?
Yeah,
a comedian, a stand-up comedian?
Yeah. Actually, yes, both of those things. And I wanted to be a musician and a stand-up comic.
And a politician.
Yeah. I mean, first it was a politician. Then when I had the spiritual thing, I tried to kind of find middle ground between politician and crazy monk. And I thought, well, I think an artist sounds like middle ground. I have that in me too. So I'll try to be an actor. And I also had this desire as a child. When we do career day, and they force that upon kids far too early.
Yeah.
But I'd do the career day and think I would just go inside and be like, the only answer that was true was, I just want to be everything.
Yeah,
I want to be everything. And it's like, how do you do that? And I thought, like, there were two paths, and one was be an actor, which was kind of, sort of.
Yeah, because you could be all kinds of things.
That's right. And one was be enlightened. And so I thought, like, well, I don't think enlightenment's in the cards for me, so I'm gonna try to do the actor. That'll.
But you knew about enlightenment.
I did.
At that age. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, I loved the Time Life books and the show In Search Of, and the internet started to happen, and all that sort of stuff. And as a little kid, I would open books on yogis and Buddhist monks meditating in the snow, and there was something deeply, arresting about that. I was just, whoa, like, could I do that? Even though I'm from Wisconsin, like,
you get snow in Wisconsin.
we do get snow, so I would try my best, but somehow, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so you were on this precipice of whether to jump into meditation big time or whether to try to be a real person in the world.
Yeah.
Although I think you can do both, as you've
Yes,
now
you
discovered.
can. Yeah.
But how did you, what helped you make that decision? And then, I guess you went in the meditation direction. So, how did that go after all when you got into it?
Well, I think I was sent some wonderful helpers and guides and mentors along the way in a little town called Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've swum in the lake and water skied on it and stuff.
You know it then. Yeah, a beautiful little place, but small. Maybe 5,000-6,000 people when I was living there.
I think I even gave a TM lecture there one time.
You did?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was for a small town. At the time I was quite astounded by all these interesting people who kind of moved in. And one day must have been the summer before my freshman year of high school. I was going around with my big sister, who was kind of. I was always close to her, and I would just go wherever she would go. Kind of as a tag along, happy tag along. And we walked into a metaphysical bookstore, and I had. Not much inclination in that direction, and I was like, okay, I'll come. I go everywhere else, and she was shopping for something in the front, and I sort of gravitated toward the back and picked up a book, and that was on this whole subject of mysticism and meditative experiences, and it was so similar to what I had experienced in the accident and afterward that I stayed in that bookshop for about 2 years, I would say. I think I had a tacit agreement.
Did your sister want to go home?
Oh no, yeah. She stayed too.
I see. Yeah, okay.
It was payback for kind of all the places that I didn't want to go before. So I think she got the worst end of the deal there, because that was a major inconvenience for her. 2 years in a minute.
I know, sleeping in the aisles.
Especially the bargaining with the police and the eviction notices from the owner. But yeah. Over a period of 2 years, I was there quite frequently, and reading all the books. And it seemed to be as long as I bought an amulet about every 2 months, the owner was really cool with me, put up with me as long as I set this up because it was there that I met some of those guides and mentors, and one was a lovely. I don't know if I should mention people's names because I don't embarrass the living, but. A wonderful friend to me who was a TM teacher and named Pam, and she was in my town, and she was working as a TM teacher, but also as kind of a local clairvoyant, and it was she was a very human person, but there was something about her, she had this resonance about her which reminded me of what I was tuning into before, and I was just glued and totally interested to find out what was going on over here. And so she was, she was a wonderful listener and wonderful at asking the perfect questions of me and kind of guiding me into different facets of my experience and sort of telling me like that's perfectly normal, that's something that's natural to human beings and is there. And it was mainly just the resonance. We'd talk about anything.
Did she try to foist TM on you, or was she real easygoing? That's nice.
Totally easygoing.
Yeah, because sometimes. Well, in any group, people can be proselytizers. It's nice that she had the wisdom to be gentle.
She was just my friend, and she was also there. She was, I think a lot of people kind of became surrogate family to me when they heard my situation. They kind of wanted to, help me out and kind of pat me on the shoulder and try to keep me on a good track and so, or a bad track, as the case may be. And so we were, we were close, and then she introduced me to another friend who was a, quote, walk-in, and he had the same sort of resonance to him, just a different flavor, but I could tell this is something quite similar about this fellow. His name was Austin, and we spent 2 years as friends, and he was, 54, I was 16, and we just hung out like we were the same age, and
Incidentally, walk-in, in case anybody doesn't know, is when a soul leaves the body and another soul comes in and takes that body, and sometimes it supposedly happens when you have a near-death experience or something and your soul checks out and another soul says, oh, this body has a bit more mileage in it, I'll come in here and serve a purpose. In fact, there was a cool story where Shankara became a walk-in.
Oh, that's right. I know that one.
Have you heard that story?
Yes, I've heard that story.
Yeah. Should we tell it? Or
I don't know.
Just as a tangent. So Shankara was this great sage, the founder of Advaita Vedanta, right? And he used to go around the country debating people and defeating them in debate generally, and then they would become his disciples. So there was this woman who was, I guess, an expert in, amorous arts, Kama Sutra or whatever, I don't know. And Shankara was like, well, I can't can't beat her in a debate. I don't know anything about that. I'm a monk. But then an opportunity came up where he could live that sort of life a little bit. So there was some king who died, and Shankara walked into his body, became the king, but it was really Shankara. And so all of a sudden the king wakes up from his deathbed and whoa, he's really bright and much more intelligent and everything than he had been. So I guess the king had several queens and they were like, this is great. He's a big improvement, and he seems a little to have forgotten a few things about what to do in the bedroom. But hey, we can work that out. And so, anyway, so this went on for a while, and eventually the queens found out they got hip to what had happened, and that this isn't really our husband. This is this other guy, this monk, and his body is hidden someplace in a cave. So they sent emissaries to find the body and destroy it, so Shankara couldn't leave because they wanted him to stay and be in the king's body. So as this was about to happen, Shankara's disciples realized that Shankara was kind of losing it in terms of his remembrance of who he really was, and so some of them came to the king's court and asked to read some poetry to the king, and so they read some poetry which had actually been written by Shankara about the nature of the self and so on. And so Shankara kind of woke up and remembered, oh yeah, I wrote that, and it's time for me to split. So he kind of left the body, the king's body dropped, and he reoccupied his own body, which was sitting in some cave, just as the emissaries from the kingdom were about to burn it or something, and he kind of hopped up and came back to life, and they lived happily ever after. End of the story.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, fun story.
I could almost believe my friend's account because it was a small town, and everybody knows everybody's dirty laundry. Basically, it doesn't take long to find it out. And he had been like a notorious town asshole most of his life. And then after he apparently was running at the hospital doing a stress test, and of all places, and had a heart attack right there and died put on the table. And then he says, I came in, the other guy went out, I came in on the table, freaked people out when I kind of sat up. And then, it wasn't long after that he was, deeply into Native American ritual spirituality and all this sort of stuff. I wasn't, that wasn't a big part of our relationship. It was mainly just the presence that came off of him and the, some of the fun things that would happen there. I would just go to his house and I would go and actually take naps for 20 minutes on his couch because his house had this electric presence you could cut with a knife. Wow. And I would just go in there. He'd be working in his car in the garage and say, hey, Austin, I'm going to take a nap. And he didn't mind me using his house in such a way. And I would go down and I'd come up completely refreshed. And then I would just leave the house and go swimming or something. And so that, I was kind of sent a lot of, even more of these people, but I don't know if I can get into everybody, but more of these.
Whatever you feel is relevant. We have plenty of time, so whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah. There was for a very white Wisconsin town, a wonderful man who is African-American Qigong master, and also named Walter Matthew Brown. He's since died a few years back, but he kind of took me under his wing as well. And I would go to his classes, and he didn't want to charge me, and he would teach me these interesting sort of Chinese-style meditations, and he would. And I always thought, well, maybe this is a placebo thing happening, but he would create these big balls of qi, and I would be palpably affected by what he was doing. And so there were these people that were in there as I was growing up still as a teenager and kind of just at this precipice. And
now, when I was recounting your various skills and accomplishments, I neglected to mention that you actually speak a fair degree of Chinese.
Well, yeah, it's quite rusty now, but yeah.
How did you learn that?
Oh, that was much later on.
Okay.
That was.
Do you speak Japanese also?
No.
Because I know your wife is in Japan.
Yeah. My wife, she's the real polyglot. She's got all that stuff down.
You're the polymath. She's the polyglot. Okay. So at this stage, did you start meditating in some fashion?
I did. I started doing. Was taught some breathing meditations and basic kind of effortless breathing meditations. And then I learned some maybe more rigid ascetic type practices, which my brain was quite tuned into that channel, biased in that direction. And so I did these count from 1 to 10 and not let your mind go on anything else but the numbers. And I actually became quite good at that and enjoyed it. But while it kind of gave my mind a sort of razor sharp concentration, it kind of was, I think, stressing me out in other ways. It was like an athletic
It's a bit
activity.
of a strain.
Yeah, it was quite a strain, and so I was like recommended by some books like if you want enlightenment, which I was really did, like meditate as much as possible. I was like, oh, I got to do this 200%, And so that was how I was wired. I was very intense. It had to be all or nothing.
Natural-born fanatic.
A natural-born fanatic. Yeah.
I can relate.
Instead of like, I knew the line to the intensely vehement soon, but I think I was often vehemently intense.
Yeah.
And so
That's a line from Patanjali, by the way.
That's right. from
Vehement
Patanjali.
intensity.
Yeah, I was definitely vehemently intense, a little bit too much. But this book had me. Various books I would be waking up at 3 in the morning and taking a cold shower and then doing yoga and then meditating for 2 or 3 hours before either being driven or walking off to school, in my last year of high school. And then I would spend a lot of my lunch hours meditating, and then I would get home and I would do 2 hours of meditation when I got home, or 1 hour and then do an hour before I went to bed.
Yeah.
And so I had this schedule, and I was like fanatically devoted to it. And I became totally antisocial. And I got rid of my possessions. I was like, I don't need these around, And I wanted to live in like I would often as a child have this sort of, it kind of came back, these visions of my room turning into what looked like a room in an ashram. I would. Even visually, the walls would fade away, and I would see a completely different room, and I'd look out a window, and there were these Himalayan peaks.
Cool.
And I was so, in this period, it was that song was really singing to me, is how I could describe it. And so I apparently at the high school, I found out later that since I was giving away a lot of my most precious possessions and becoming antisocial, they put me on suicide watch, and I had no.
I thought you were getting ready to check out.
I was getting ready to check out. Everybody meant very well. I was fasting a lot too, and I was, it said fasting is good for you. So like, oh, if fasting is good, then I'm going to do it.
There's so many similarities between you and me. I've gone through such fanatical phases, including radical fasting, and always like any little instruction that was given, doing it like 10 times more than I was supposed to.
I was told like drink a gallon a day. I said like I will drink 2 gallons a day.
Exactly.
That's what I would do.
Very similar mindset.
When I was fasting, I said like I should not stop my running program. I should double it.
Oof.
And I was and when it was too easy, I was like, this is too easy. I need to put rocks in a backpack and run up the highest hill in town. And I did it.
Oh man, you're worse than me.
I was a nut. I was a total nut.
Way worse.
But even though I was a nut, and I don't recommend this, I don't necessarily recommend this. I think it was good for me because it was in me. It was in me to do it. And I really felt like I need to maybe burn it off, or I need to express this. I need to really do this to really kind of, appease whatever is going on, whatever need. And so I did it.
You probably had some ascetic practices in past lifetimes in those Himalayan mountains, bathing in cold streams and sitting in the snow and all that jazz.
I would go out at lunch hour in Wisconsin, and sometimes I would go out into the middle of sort of like the soccer field that was right outside the lunchroom. It'd be covered in snow, and be like, I'm going to sit in the snow and meditate. And just.
Did people see you? I mean, the school authorities would say, we really got to watch this guy.
I think that probably contributed to the suicide watch. I was a good student, especially that year. I was
getting good grades and stuff.
It was amazing. I always had good grades, but they kind of fell off a little bit. They weren't like total straight A.
So much.
Well, they fell off in high school before the meditation because I was sad and depressed. And I, on the fence, and I was once before the car accident. I was totally lined up with a plan, and now after I was like, what's the plan now? And I was really kind of flailing a little bit. But when I was meditating, I was thinking like I could just very well fail this year if I do 6 hours of meditation every day. Because I've signed up for AP courses and all of these sorts of things, and it's a pretty busy schedule. And I kind of said like, kind of praying to whomever might be listening, if there were any spirit guides or God or Babaji or whomever, like, anything you can do to help. I'm doing this because I think this is the purpose of life, and any help that can come along the way that makes this easier would be great. But there were no problems at all academically. I would read like my psychology textbook, and suddenly I could really speed read very well, and there would be some sort of grokking that would happen, this global grokking of the pages. And when I would sit down to take a test, I didn't necessarily have all of the information in a folder in my mind, but when I would look at the answers, the multiple choice questions, I would see the page that the answer was on.
Yeah.
I would see the number. I would see it all in my mind.
On page 323, paragraph 2, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I did most of the extra credit. And I think I finished the year with 126% in that class.
Huh.
And the similar things in an English class. A teacher, all of these teachers I had then were wonderful, wonderful mentors as well. It was, you know, I don't think they put me on suicide watch, but if they did, they meant well. But they were there for me spiritually as well.
Yeah.
And so I had an English course, and I remember I had a 5-page essay to type, to turn in, and I hadn't done it yet because I was meditating. And as I was meditating, I was like, okay, you better help me out. And so 30 minutes, an hour, 30 minutes before the class, I sat down at the computer and said, like, okay. And then all of a sudden, you know, kind of like in Bruce Almighty when he's typing all those emails, and it just there was so much coherency in my mind. I mean, it was so clear.
Yeah.
It was just so effortless, and then it came out, turned it in, and it was a good paper apparently.
That's great.
So I was, you know, stuff like that.
Amazing.
You know, kind of came into the life.
Yeah, I mean, so like an obvious question to ask would be, did all that meditation make you spacey? Because it can. I mean, meditating that much, you can't really function in activity. But it seems like you sort of plunged into activity when you weren't meditating with such intensity, with rocks in your backpack and all this other stuff, that it kind of counterbalanced the long meditations and grounded you, or focused you.
That helped, yeah. I mean, I certainly could be spacey, also because I was attempting to be.
And you were fasting.
Yeah, and the rest of the time I was thinking, like, maybe I could be a breatharian, you know. I was, you know, proper Wisconsin, bratwurst meat eater at the start, and I thought, you know, for various reasons, I need to be vegetarian. Mm-hmm. And then I found out about veganism. I need to be vegan.
Right.
And then I found out about fruitarianism, and I thought I need to be a fruitarian. Then it kind of escalated.
I've experimented with all those things, fruitarianism.
I wanted to
Kindred soul here.
whatever the apogee or the apex seemed to be. I was kind of like wired to try to get myself in position to be there.
Yeah, I mean, your basic attitude was, I'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it 200%,
Yeah.
you know, because I am so hot to trot.
Yeah,
I'm just not going to be wishy-washy about this.
That's right.
There's a line in the Bible, you know, Christ said, you know, either be hot or cold. If you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Let thine eye be single and thy body be filled with light.
Yeah.
You know, I felt like I'm going to be, you know, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. And also, I mean, having, you know, seeing one's mother, you know, kind of go through her life and pay attention to her struggles and the dynamics there, to have it end at 45, also, you know, unexpectedly, was really put a pall of urgency over my whole life, and from that point. And there was always a sense that, you know, I could be living on borrowed time here, a very visceral sense. And I was, gather ye rosebuds while ye may times 10. And so that was always in the background pushing me. And it was always like, if I could live, you know, what is the highest life I could manifest here on earth? And then I will do whatever I can, you know, of course, fall off the horse quite a few times.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the long range goal is to do whatever I can to sort of get there and to kind of connect with that. And
yeah, I think it can be taken to extremes, and one can become too fanatical. Motorcycle going by or something here, a truck.
Quiet Sedona.
Yeah. But I think there is something to be. Oh, it's a garbage truck. There is something to be said for the sense of urgency. I know Amma always says, live your life as though you're a bird on a branch that could break at any time. And I think when she says that, I get the implication she's saying, don't be attached. She's not saying, like, you know, be a fanatic, but she's saying, don't be attached, because anything that you're attached to could be pulled out from under you at any time.
Right.
But then others, you know, Shankara and others have always talked about, you know, live each day as if it were your last, and just take care of the highest first. Whatever the highest and most important, best thing you can do that. Yeah. Don't waste time, because time is precious. Yeah. And life flashes by. Yeah. You know, it really does. Yeah. Not that, you know, and we can take the long view picture, and there will be other lives and all, but I don't know, it's like, it's a precious opportunity, especially if you kind of realize what you're realizing here, and you know that there's this thing that can be achieved. it's a precious opportunity to actually achieve it to whatever extent you can.
That's right. Yeah.
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 And because if you don't, if you know it and then you just brush it off, you may not know it next time, and you
Right.
might have who knows how many lifetimes where you're just sort of spinning your wheels.
Right, and you know, you don't necessarily need the sense of urgency. I've known plenty of people who kind of you know, woke up and they rather weren't looking for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, everybody's different, but I do agree that in general there's a use and a value to having that appreciation that, you know, right now, you know, carpe diem, you know, seize the moment,
Seize the day.
you know.
Dead Poets Society.
Don't leave. I always, in my mind was always, don't leave anything on the table. You know,
Yeah.
or you never know if this is going to be your last sort of interaction with any particular person. So if you have love in there, if you have songs of your soul in there, don't leave them unsung. You know, sing them and get them out. And that's certainly been a big theme of my life.
And it again, just to sort of keep it balanced, it doesn't mean like do what the Buddha did, is, you know, leave your wife and kids and go off and you know, perform austerities or something. One can, within one's dharma.
Yes,
we have a dharma.
we do.
And it doesn't mean abandon your dharma and just try to adopt the dharma of somebody else, which you can't perform anyway,
Right.
probably. But within your dharma, you have wiggle room, you have leeway. And, you know, you can always be sort of pushing the envelope in terms
Yeah.
of, you know, what the best thing you can do, the highest thing you can do, the most evolutionary thing you can do within the realm of the possible in your
Right.
life. Not in somebody else's life, but in your life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you know, I moved out of the ascetic phase very much, which was
Yeah,
interesting.
I can tell you're a little pudgy now.
Yeah, I was also thin non-ascetic too, so you know, this is extra credit probably here.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, came out of that.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, and
So, okay, so you were in high school, you're meditating 6 hours a day,
Yeah.
you're doing okay academically. Were you doing any sports on top of all that? Well, you said you were running up hills with rocks. And
that was a sport. I didn't have much time. I didn't
Not much
have
time for sports on top of
and
everything
actually, the whole car accident thing, in many ways, for a while, kind of knocked out my competitive drive.
Yeah.
And I just didn't have the juice to do it. I was so, you know, which was to me disappointing. I was like, hey, where is it? You know.
Yeah.
And instead, I was like, okay, all my juice is in now trying to go back into this sort of dimension, this inner dimension, and you know, however I could do that. So that kind of changed. But I was in our traveling jazz band.
Oh,
in high
cool.
school,
Oh, that's
and
right. You were a drummer.
Yeah. That was great fun, and that kind of gave me a good like physical coordinating activity to kind of I think balance out a lot.
Drumming was very integrating.
Yes.
You know, when you've been playing for an hour or something and you're really into it, the mind gets into this coherent.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever see Zakir Hussain play the tablas?
I don't think so.
World's best tabla player. But you watch him play, and it's just such lightning fast stuff, and you know that none of it's random. He's like working within time signatures and beat signatures that have to be done a certain way, but it's like going at the speed of light, and you think, wow, the level of coherence in his brain to be able to do that is unbelievable. Anyway, we're going off on little mini tangents here, but that's okay.
Lots of tangents.
So what's the next major phase? We're getting serious here. We've got our shirts off, coats.
Roll the sleeves up now too, going to work.
So what was the next phase for you after this whole high school phase?
Well,
I mean, this obviously didn't go on forever.
No. Yeah. Well, you know, for all its merits, my crazy ascetic path had some. It wasn't totally fulfilling, you know, and I think I was given the book Autobiography of a Yogi. I believe it was my future brother-in-law who gave it to me, if I remember correctly. And when I read that book, that's
a biggie for a lot of people.
Yes, yeah. Dams broke you know, in my heart, and worlds opened, and there was a sense that I had been quite provincial in what I thought were all the paths out there and all the practices and just the world.
Provincial meaning kind of narrow-minded?
Kind of narrow-minded, yeah.
Okay.
I was fairly myopic after I realized I was quite myopic after reading that book, and it opened things up for me. And even without any proper Kriya instruction, somehow the tenor and the timbre of my meditations changed, and there was this blissfulness that was showing up.
Yeah.
And there was this the mind would get quiet after a while, but my heart would start to open, and noticeably there was a sense of my heart opening into the silence as well, and I would, Yogananda made this big promise in the book, if you've read it. He said, if you just pray to Babaji, earnestly, he'll answer you. And of course, you would guess that I would say, like, I'm just going to pray to Babaji all the time. Okay. That's what I did. It's like, all right, Yogananda, I hope this promise is true. And I would do that earnestly at the end of my meditations, because I wanted to find my path, and I was shopping around for monasteries. It didn't matter if it was Zen or Carmelite or...
You wanted to join one?
Yes, my heart said, like, you've got to go be a monk somewhere, and I knew that was true, and so I, just by happenstance, this same future brother-in-law named Darshan, who gave me this book, knew this practice called the Ishaya's Ascension, and at first I was maybe a little bit skeptical of it, because of the name. So the name and the taglines were praise, gratitude, and love, and they're talking about stress release. I was like, stress release? I can take more. Like that's not interesting. And it wasn't always initially presented to me as enlightenment, which was the word that would have made sense to my little mind.
Well, the reason they mentioned stress release is that it was founded by a guy who had been a TM teacher, who was on my course when I became a TM teacher. And he picked up some of the nomenclature, kept some of the nomenclature, and actually also the mechanics of the practice, as I understand it. So, and there too, even in the TM movement, there was a sort of a split personality disorder in terms of, are we a university or are we an ashram? Is this a spiritual thing or is it a stress release type of thing?
Yeah.
And you'd try to, when you gave lectures, you'd sort of try to present real practical things, stress release and better health and better behavior and, stuff like that. But then there's this sort of more esoteric teaching of all the higher states of consciousness that could be attained and so on. But you don't hit people with that right off the bat.
Yeah, and I was one who wanted to get hit with that right off the bat.
That was what
that was what I was interested in.
Yeah.
And so, initially I wasn't going to do it. I loved having him meditate with me, because I could feel that he was tapping into this presence. And one day I came home from, I founded the Lake Geneva Environmental Society, which just consisted of me picking up cigarette butts and garbage and putting into a plastic bag. And,
very cool.
And I ruined our hot dog tongs were ruined from any other use by doing that. So I came home.
You just do that around town.
Yeah, because I didn't like, I thought I got to do something, and I want to be out there showing, like tangibly, making an example.
You and I have so much in common. I don't mean to keep talking about myself, but even now as I ride around town on a bicycle, if I see a can or even sometimes a cigarette pack or something, I'll just get off my bike, pick it up, put it in my little baskets, and keep riding. And just because it's the kind of thing, if everybody did it, we'd have a real clean town, a real clean world. Everybody's not going to do it, but at least I'll do it.
Yeah, that's right. My record was 1,200 cigarette butts. I counted them.
In a day?
In a day.
Wow.
Yeah. I was astounded it got that high, but I was just around like maybe 10 city blocks crisscrossed. That was my area that day, and I would go and pick up cans from the stream, and one time it was like frozen over, and I was reaching out to get a can.
And you fell in?
I fell in. And I actually felt quite good, but it was quite cold.
Well, you were used to cold baths.
Starting to numb out, so I stripped my clothes off down to my boxer shorts, and thankfully they were friendly with me at the local Starbucks. They had a fireplace.
Let you warm up.
Yeah, they let me hang my clothes up in front of the fireplace and do because I was already kind of crazy. So like, let the crazy meditating environmentalist do his thing. So it was great. They gave me a complimentary chai that day. I have to say to help me warm up. So thank you to everybody who made that decision. 16 years ago. So I came home from one of these forays, and he asked me, like, do you want to come to a course on Friday? Go up to Minneapolis and learn Ascension. And he said, like there's $300 extra that kind of showed up in my bank account for it. And when I was like notorious for not doing anything but my schedule. I was really rigid. Like I felt if you are an enemy of my schedule, you are an enemy of enlightenment.
Right.
It's very, kind of harsh there. But I found myself totally like, I surprised myself, like, what? It's like, yep, we're doing it. And so, a few days later we go off and do this course, and we go into the basement of a chiropractic office, and there's maybe 10 people up down there, and there's 2 teachers wearing a sort of monochromatic garb, and right away I was going like, oh my God, like
What am I getting into?
what am I getting into here? I was skeptical of the word workshop. It sounded like something for middle-aged people who wanted to like have some frivolous distraction and non-serious activity. But I was open. I was kind of trying to go with the spirit of Gandhi, or the spirit of like an open-minded spiritual scientist, and that was what I had about me. It's like, we're gonna be an empiricist, and we're just gonna do it exactly as they tell me, and see what happens. And so I was still quite skeptical, and as the teachers were kind of explaining how to do the practice, once I saw the first technique, which was like, what, that's gonna work? They were like, and it'll even work if you're completely skeptical, and they just both looked at me at the same moment. I was like, yeah, good. I said that, as a teenager would at a meditation course, a little irreverence. And it did. And I
So
first,
worked meant what?
well, oh yes. Didn't take, for me, and this isn't for everybody, but for me, it was within 30 seconds. I mean, at first it's an effortless practice, and it's kind of a mantra-based practice. So you think the technique, and then you allow your mind to do what it does. And when you're, like TM, then you come back to the technique. And most of the quality of my thoughts were, this is stupid, or this ain't gonna work. And then all of a sudden I found, even while my mind was having those thoughts, that this vast silence just kind of overwhelmed me, overtook me. I rose or I fell into it, and my body was completely relaxed. And it was not getting that much relaxation in all this ascetic stuff. It really wasn't. And it was, oh my God, what is going on with my leg, And that basically, lasted more or less in that range through the rest of the weekend, and it was incredible. I was really stunned, and I kept up with it, and I think by the end of the weekend, I was asking them at the end of the course, do you have a monastery that
I could join?
That I could come and join? I could be ready within 48 hours. I just need to go home. I've settled most of my affairs. I've got my bag packed. And they were like, whoa, no, it got sold. And I was like, oh shucks. But here's some numbers of people you could call. We think they're doing something similar. I was like, okay, thank you. And they're like, don't do it for 6 hours. I'm going to do it for 6 hours. And they're like, and they're like, well, you it could be intense. And I said, like, I am the intensity, something like that, or something like that. I can handle it,
I am your father.
I was, really raring to go there. And but I was also a little, I'm going to give this, like a few weeks and see, maybe I stumbled into some sort of anomalous kind of high, maybe we'll see if there's like what happens with the honeymoon, if it's a honeymoon period, or I wanted to kind of give it some time. And it didn't take many days after for me to know, like, oh my God, no, this is the path I had been praying for. This kind of has, how to explain it, there was a sense my whole life in me that of a connection, almost like a song or an energetic signature or something that was calling to me, impelling my life, that I had seen in visions as a child or had kind of felt under the surface. And when I ran into this, that was it. There was a sense that was it. And like before there was a sense of kind of being scattered. But now it was like, no, I think this is quite my North Star. So I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens. And so
you joined some monastery type place?
Yeah, it was not long after. It took me about, I think, 3 months from the time I learned to move out to Seattle with my sister and my brother-in-law and get a little apartment. And my plan was I was going to work the summer in Seattle and give it a little bit more time, and then see if I could go down to this sort of ashram monastery type meditation center on the Oregon coast. And only my heart was saying, like, no, just do it now. I had the sense of, what am I doing here? I'm just treading water. I'm just time wasting here. I just need to go. So I paid them 2 or 3 months rent, because I wasn't planning on not being there. And I came down to interview at this center in Oregon, and kind of with the idea in my mind, like, well, if they kick me out, I shall just camp in the forest and show them my,
Dedication.
my dedication, because that's how I thought it worked,
Right.
in the books and movies. And I didn't have to do that. And that was right when I came there. It was kind of clear, that oh my God, each face I'd meet was like, oh my God, I know you.
Huh.
Like this.
It's like your little soul family. or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, it was powerful.
Yeah.
It's like.
Could also have been that there was some dawning unity, and you're seeing the self in all beings, and so there's that familiarity.
That could be the case as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I certainly had, I still had some, the neuroses that I developed. Although I was always told, like, I would tell people, oh, I've got to have a lot of stress. Like I'm sure I have a lot of stress, and then people would laugh at me and say, like, you don't have any stress, or whatever. But
And by that you mean vasanas, like accumulated impressions
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
nervous system. That's all from life experiences, and you were saying you must have a lot of it stored there. And others were saying you don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was convinced I had an awful lot of work to do.
Right.
I have to
Like I'm a mess.
roll my sleeves up and
Yeah.
really be earnest about all this. And yeah.
So how long were you in this place, and how did it go?
Well, it went very well. They just like with TM, they do these very long in residence retreat programs. I wasn't quite really interested in being a meditation teacher at the time. I just wanted to get enlightened,
Yeah.
and so if I could be in a center for many years, that sounded like a great time, and chop wood and do all that sort of stuff. But they suggested, well, if that's your desire, you should do this long course. It's like, okay, we're dovetailing then.
It was a teacher training course.
Yeah, and I didn't really have the money to pay for it, but they were so wonderful in offering me kind of a
Work study program.
work exchange program, which was really cool, because that also matched a very interesting experience that happened the year before. I wasn't yet clear that I was going to go be a monk. I thought, oh, I'm going to go to some college and I'll just meditate as much as I can there, and that was the idea. But so I was walking in the Walmart in Lake Geneva, and I just had the intuition to ask myself, I wonder where I'm going to be a year from now. And then, to my surprise, I had this full sort of visual answer with captioning, and it was, well, you're going to be working in a mostly vegetarian cafe, living with a bunch of monks, many of whom wear the color white.
And this all came to you.
This all came to me. It was very detailed. It was like,
Yeah.
you will start out as the dishwasher, and then you'll be progressively trained to do more and more of the jobs, and eventually study with a chef and be taught to cook like you've always wanted.
Ah.
And I was like, I saw that experience, and I was like, unlikely, and I just kind of threw it away. Just kept on with being a happy sort of 17-year-old.
Right.
And then so when I was on the phone call with this group in Oregon, the last thing that my interviewer mentioned was, oh, and by the way, we're about to open up a cafe. Maybe you could have a job there. And I was like, I didn't want to tell him because I thought maybe if I told him that I'd get kicked out, I ought to have. But I kind of let that go. I was like, that's just a coincidence. That's what I was thinking. It's probably just a
I think
coincidence.
you should know by now. Should have known by then.
I should have.
Because this kind of stuff has been
I
happening.
know,
to
but I
you.
was still such a rationalist in so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
ways, and I wanted to kind of, in some ways, I wanted to be able to engage with the credible world,
Yeah.
and kind of build bridges. So I had to always be as scientific as I could. But yeah, I probably ought to have known.
Yeah.
And so then it was, I was doing my sort of apprenticeship program, my work study thing, and I was at the kitchen window chopping one day, and when I looked up, because I've always been a very visual person, I see things before they happen. It was the exact scene from that Walmart vision. Like, and I was like,
I see.
What?
It was like this deja vu thing, but
So strong, deja vu times 10, and that there threw me into this presence, and I was
Right.
in that for especially thick for like 2 days, just like whoa, and
That's interesting.
yeah. So
Yeah, I remember some line from Maharishi's commentary on the Gita where he talks about how the future can cast its vision upon the pure of heart. You can actually have clear prognostications like that.
Yeah, it seems to come with the important nodal things, especially in my life, the big directional things, and that was. It was
It's almost like an opportunity to have a confirmation because you've had the vision, and then sure enough, here it is, and okay, this must have been where I was supposed to go.
Yeah. I was always kind of an amateur parapsychologist, so those sorts of confirmations that would blow my logical mind were especially interesting to me
Yeah.
to have it so that I couldn't really describe it explain any other way.
So you were a chef there in this cafe, and I think you said there was a Mexican chef that was your mentor or
Oh
something?
yes, he named Yogananda.
Does this mean you can cook really good Mexican food?
Well, it means
And are you going
that.
to prove that to me?
Well, okay. I think my education in some ways was a little uneven, but I will say that I make a wonderful chilaquiles. I can knock your the chilaquiles will knock your socks off. So
Okay.
that's.
I don't even
that's
know what
still-
those are, but we
it's
may
what
have
you
to
do with
talk
leftover
about that.
tortilla chips and we're going to turn into a cooking show, but yeah, sautéed onions and leftover tortilla chips and some scrambled eggs. You cook them together, and I like them with a salsa verde. They're good with a mole too.
Maybe
and-
we should have that for dinner tonight.
Yeah,
or
we could-
lunch today or
it's
something.
good, it's kind of good peasant worker food,
Yeah.
like so much of the best food.
Well, I'm a
But-
peasant worker.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
So okay, so how long did you stay in that
I was
monastery? And
with-
what'd you learn there?
Yeah,
How'd you change there?
I changed immensely, and I was there for 6.5 years, kind of both in a center on the Oregon coast, but then we also had sort of satellite meditation centers where a lot of students had learned and wanted to have teachers there full time to kind of be more available. And so I was in this restaurant until we sold it. Of course, I had the 6-month-long in-residence teacher training program, which was wonderful, and that the transformation that happened there is difficult to describe in words adequately. But I would come to some days. I would go down to meditate maybe after doing yoga asanas and sun salutations. Go back to the meditation room and be down for 9 hours or something, and when I'd get up, at 6 or whenever the dinner was.
You would have just sat there without a break for 9 hours.
Sometimes, yeah. And sometimes, get up and
Get up,
of
go to
course,
the bathroom or
and
something,
especially with 2 gallons of water a day.
Oh, you do?
Then I was told to stop that. It's like
Yeah.
it's okay if you only do one. Are you sure? Like, yes. Like, okay, all right, I'll only do one.
It can actually be bad for you drinking too much water. But
So
anyway,
I've been told I've done a lot of things that ought to be bad for me.
Yeah.
I kind of survived them. Luck was on my side. So yeah, the teacher training was incredibly transformative, and it also helped that beforehand I had very clear experiences through the meditation of what in TM you'd call the transcendent, and what my system you call the ascendant, or the presence, the unmanifest.
Right.
And so going into the teacher training was just exploring that and sinking into it and deepening it. And some days I would wake up in the morning and have this feeling that I could only describe as, it feels like 2 lifetimes have just vanished. Like I didn't know they were there, but they're gone.
like you worked through that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, some say that. Some say you can work through lifetimes of karma in a single meditation if it's deep enough.
You'd see, I would feel so fundamentally lighter that those would be the words I would use to describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all sorts of those. I know some of the things you talk about on this show. A lot of those things sort of kind of happened and transpired beginning at that course, and then after that must have been four more years after that, teaching meditation and traveling around and living in the centers and going to places that I had. As a teenager with lots of wanderlust, I'd always wanted to go, but I gave up my big desire basket. I said, I just want this desire, and you can have this. And then I found that, oh my God, that's the thing I wanted to do.
Like Switzerland, for instance.
Oh yes, like Switzerland.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And so I'd had a strange, sudden obsession. Well, maybe it's not strange because it's a beautiful place. Was Switzerland at age 16, and I'd let that go, and then here I am, 20 years old, and I'm invited to go for a 2-week teaching tour in Switzerland, and I didn't have a passport, and this was another little miracle.
Get one real fast.
I had to get one real fast, and I did all the things right, and I went to the Lincoln County courthouse to get the passport, and I was going to pay for it expedited, but then they told me, and I needed it the next day. I didn't know, and they said, well, there's no way this is going to get to you the next day.
Yeah.
It's like 3 or 4 p.m. and it's because we have to send it to the Seattle Passport Agency. They have to process it, they have to stamp it, then they have to mail it to you at your cafe in Lincoln City. If you expedite it here, the best we could do for you, we think is 3 days.
Yeah.
And I was so like
Yeah,
I was,
plane ticket or something.
yeah, I had a plane ticket already. I acted, and I'd begun and acted as if it
Yeah.
were so. And so, but I was upright. I was like, well, if I can't go, then I can't go. But I have faith that, whatever needs to happen is going to happen. I thank them profusely. I say, thank you for whatever you can do. I appreciate it. I really hope it shows up tomorrow, nevertheless.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And I still don't quite know how that happened. I don't know bureaucracies to normally work that fast.
Yeah.
But it was 11 a.m. the next day in the cafe, and there were people there. But when I got this package with my name on it from the Seattle Passport Agency, I definitely said, "Holy fuck!" really loud, and then so joyous, so joyful. But the guy I was going with said like, "Oh, shush, Ishtar, no." It's like it's okay. I know you're joyful, and it's like, yeah, this is great, And so I'm going to Switzerland, and when I got there, it was like another one of those weird nodal points of deja vu, destiny times 10, and somehow I was just completely in a strange bliss by just being there and teaching meditation and being on Lake Lucerne and all of that sort of stuff. It was just hitting me from so many different angles. And later I got to go back again 2 years later and live there for about a month and a half and had a similarly profound experience, and was sent off to different places like Helsinki, Finland, and Hong Kong and Michigan. I loved being in Michigan, and so that was kind of my own sort of Shangri-La experience for all those years, getting to do that. And then
That's pretty neat.
yeah.
Tell that experience about when you were in Brunnen, Switzerland, and
sure.
you looked up at the cliff.
Yeah, that's right.
I used to meditate up there in that facility up on that cliff, and in Brunnen.
Right, and I may very well have been picking up on your wave. So, anyways, it was
years earlier. Earlier, early
yeah.
70s, but
it might have been a battery up there. But I was sitting in this lovely lakeside cafe, beautiful day, on a little kind of sort of a concrete jetty out into the water, and my seat was oriented right toward this kind of bluff on over Lake Lucerne, and suddenly I was tearing up, and I can do it now, tears of joy, and my heart was like a sun was shining through my whole being, and there was this deep sense of being home, looking up at that bluff, and it was like, oh my God, I'm home, and I saw this kind of like light coming up off of the cliff, and I asked my host, like, what's up there? Is there anything going on up there? And they're like, das ist, no, that is the
do the Swiss accent.
Yeah, it sounds Swedish, but it's not. That is the old Maharishi place. The Maharishi people, they call them TM people, the Maharishi people used to meditate and live up there. That is a Seelisberg. And I was like, oh, and that was just okay, all right.
Incidentally, at the foot of that cliff, down by the lake, is a place called Rutli, which is supposedly where Switzerland was founded, and also supposedly where the apple was shot off of William Tell's head.
Yeah.
As the story goes.
Yeah. The foundation of Switzerland, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. What year were you born?
1983. Good year.
I wonder if you had been somebody in the TM movement who had died.
Yeah. Maybe yes. I never felt that I had a 20th century life. I just never, I felt like, oh, I'm here in the 20th century. Oh, Lord, okay.
Interesting.
But
okay, so obviously then the monastery and the traveling and all that stuff, that phase came to an end somehow.
That had to, yeah. I wasn't expecting it. I felt like I was having these experiences where I was more and more regularly feeling like I was in everything. Yeah. I would look at myself through other people's eyes, or I would, see people, and I was as if I was looking at me, and I felt as if I could be up till 3 a.m. writing these like newsletters, and just felt like I was being powered by a bunch of juice, like something plugged into my back, and I was just going. And it was just so much joy living this life. I was so joyous to do that. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, I would take these midnight walks to kind of like chill out. And from my heart, I started getting this sort of invitation to, like, you should get fired. It's like, what? You should get yourself kicked out. get yourself kicked out of the organization. I was like, oh, and it was coming from the same sort of place that I trusted my whole life. It had the same resonance of, that's what you really ought to do.
Interesting.
But I wanted to fight it.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, you can't be serious. It's like when you shake the 8-ball, like, I'm going to do this again.
Yeah.
And it was pretty insistent, and I just kind of pushed that away because I really thought, like, I did feel a sense of safety being tethered to an organization with teachers who had more consciousness than me. I had a deep respect for lineage, for the value of like, passing things down as purely as possible, and all the things that sort of attend that. I really, appreciated that, but at the same time, this thing in my heart was saying, like, no, get kicked out. And I was like, And so I think I stayed about a year past my expiration date. I think that was it. And I just, and it was funny because after I ignored that, I was on such a sort of expanded track. It just imploded, or it just, things got gummy. Because I was ignoring it, because I was fighting it. Things got gummy, and I thankfully, years before I'd made a promise to myself that if I ever found myself as kind of a malcontent, if this somehow was no longer my own Shangri-La, if I was not expanding, if I was not, like able to expand every day and kind of shed the stuff that might accumulate, then it was time for me to go. And I found myself in that place, and it was hard, but I was like, yep, I'm going to honor that promise. I don't want to do it because, man, life might really suck, It's
interesting.
I did it.
It's yet another similarity between you and I, because I got kicked out of the TM movement, and I did it it happened because I was just I was getting involved with AMA, and I was just sort of doing things like sending out little emails and stuff about little AMA events in town, which I kind of knew in the back of my mind could get me kicked out of the TM movement. But it's like, if it happens, it happens. Maybe it should happen. I don't care. I'm just going to do this, and I'll still go to the Dome and meditate if they want me to. And sure enough, they got wind of it and kicked me out. But these are almost like archetypical patterns or something you and I have both followed.
Life tracks.
There's so many similarities that we've come up with so far.
Same song structure, maybe different notes, different octaves. Yeah, different.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's.
I mean, maybe they're just sort of reflective of human psychology and how it often plays out in groups and spiritual organizations and with seekers and stuff, fanatical people and administrative types and, all this different stuff. But
I mean, it's funny too, because like part of the reason I was Vaughn, or as I learned to call him MSI, 'cause that's all I ever knew him as.
Right.
Part of the, in some ways, part of the genesis of my particular meditation teaching was often presented as moving away from sort of the rigidities or maybe the kind of some of the cultish aspects or facets of the over-controlling aspects of the TM world. And then I found that those,
kind of crept into
the ascension world.
Yeah.
And I would find myself, maybe they were totally unimportant arguments, but I found myself becoming so argumentative about stuff that I felt was groupthink, or stuff that I felt, like this isn't the important stuff, this isn't good, this isn't a good direction. And I started to find myself in the minority there.
Yeah.
And, maybe sometimes characterized as just saying that because you have stress, or because, you've got a,
that same thing they used to say in the TM. You're unstressing, they would say.
Yeah, you're off.
If your behavior was not kind of kosher in some, or at least according to the group mentality, oh, you're just unstressing.
Yeah. And maybe some of that might have been true, because I think I certainly was causing myself friction by ignoring the necessity probably to follow the Holy Spirit and leave.
Yeah.
But that was what had to happen. And so I kind of
I mean, when the chick hatches, it's not really helpful for the chick or for the other eggs for him to stay in the incubator.
Yeah.
It's time to get out of the incubator. He's just going to cause trouble there and kind of restrict his own growth.
Yeah.
So there's times to be in groups and movements and this and that, and there's times to leave.
That's right.
And
exactly.
And a lot of people leave with sour grapes. It's like they just reject the whole thing as having been a complete waste of time. But I think maybe sometimes it has been. But I think it's usually a more healthy attitude to say, well, I'm grateful, for everything I learned in that, and now I'm on to my next phase. But those who are still in it, I wish them well and stay in it as long as they want. It seems to be working for them. Great.
Right.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah. I have. I'm in an interesting position internally where I have all this love and appreciation for so many of the people who were my mentors, and
Yeah.
who were kind of I looked up to, and were there for me as almost like a a surrogate family in many ways, a second spiritual family. And at the same time, there's not really much contact. And some of my best friends, former best friends,
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
I still consider myself friend, but from what I would see and what I hear in the emails and messages sent to me, maybe it's not mutual all the time. But,
Yeah.
the hand is always open on this side.
You're kind of a black sheep.
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to be the case.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, some people, that monastic experience was essential.
Yeah.
Perfect for me. It was definitely in my script.
Good phase for your life.
Wonderful. Yeah, it was everything I wanted and so much more. And so many experiences that I thought conservative I was going like, well, this could take 3 lifetimes, so you better start on it now,
Yeah.
and to get to certain experiences and then whoa, is that what I had read about and wow, I didn't think that it would happen.
Well, what were some of the experiences? And we've been talking about the external circumstances
Right.
a lot
Oh,
now.
that's right.
And, I mean, what were some of the subjective stages of advancement?
Oh, hello. Hello. Oh, I'll keep going with the interview.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, well,
It's all right.
I would say certainly having
A little doggy here.
so much activity and working in that kitchen, it was a wonderful ground for experiencing the silence while being very dynamically engaged.
Yeah.
And so the witnessing, or what we call
Yeah.
the witnessing, was very strong
Right.
at points.
And it's a good stabilization of
Yes.
that, to see if it can maintain and to learn how to maintain it
Right.
in the midst of intense activity.
Yes, it was a
Not
beautiful.
that you're making an effort to maintain it.
No,
but
no,
it
there
just
was no
gets
effort.
maintained.
There was no sense of like a weird dissociative type thing.
No.
It was just natural, and
No.
it would kind of sometimes sneak up on me. I'd be
Yeah.
at the ticket window, and I'd be kind of considering like when to put these eggs in and when to start this, and doing all the gymnastics you have to do as a chef at lunch hour. But then I would notice, whoa, what is? I've in fact been in silence this whole time.
Right. And you're just kind of on automatic doing
Yeah,
this
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. And then once I would appreciate that, then it would kind of deepen and become
Yeah.
thick. And I would then start to kind of, as soon as I would go in one of those doors, I would start to be in the whole restaurant, or kind of feel into people and feel into the food and kind of be in that space. And it was a wonderful, beautiful dance, especially as one of my best friends from Finland, he was kind of my co-cook, and he did the cold side, I did the hot side. And I said, let's make it a show kitchen. And we were really tuned into each other, and like it was a ballet. He would frisbee tortillas to me, and I'd catch him behind my back,
that kind of stuff.
and I would flip things from the saute pan onto the plate, and just
Cool,
do
so
it for
people
fun.
were watching.
No, they couldn't see it. I just wanted to do it for our own
I thought
sake.
it was more like that Seattle fish market
Oh,
where
no,
they're
no.
throwing the fish. And
It would have been nice if we had an audience. I would have liked that. It would have been fun. But he was wushu trained before, and so he was quite good with his body, like as a dancer. And so we just did it for fun because
fun.
there was we had a shared joy because we were both sort of tuned into the silence together, and
Yeah.
we knew it. And it was a wonderful kind of play to just for fun.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. I never sought out awareness during sleep because frankly I'd never read about it. So that took me by surprise.
when it started happening.
Yes, yeah, that was. I was like, actually, I didn't like it because many of the times it was like I felt like I was stuck inside an inert log, and I remember I would try to like. It felt as if my mind was asleep too, which of course later would produce the question: well, if you're aware and your mind's asleep,
How do you know you're
how do you
aware?
know? Yeah, exactly. But I would remember I was like almost like knocking on my mind, and my mind was going like that. That's the best I could describe it, like
Yeah.
the thought of nothing. And I would say like, hey, like I'd like to move this body,
Right.
But it's like, and then I just would have to give up because nothing would happen, and I would spend however long it was just kind of being in awareness, and I
Yeah.
didn't like it. So I said like, if anybody can just like not have that happen, that would be great. And so it kind of stopped.
Yeah.
And yeah, because I like sleeping a lot.
Yeah, I've talked to friends who have had it start and then have wanted it to stop, and it eventually did. I've talked to other friends, like Harry Alto, who says he hasn't slept in 60 years because, but his body has slept, but the inner awareness just doesn't get overshadowed or clouded by sleep.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe it's optional or whatever. Maybe it depends on the individual's makeup, but it's a thing.
Yes.
And sometimes when people first start having it, they think there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
Think they have insomnia or something. But it's just a matter of the inner awareness having been sort of enlivened to the extent that the tamas, the dullness of sleep, can't overshadow it.
Right. Yeah.
You know? And by definition, most people watching this are familiar with the notion that pure awareness is a continuum. It just is always there, whereas the cycles of waking, dreaming, and sleeping kind of go on. And one can reach a stage at which one is aware of that continuum 24/7. Wow.
Yeah. And then there were also fun experiences with what, at least in our little collective, maybe it was improperly named Ritambara Pragya, or I might say manifesting things, but that's only a small facet of a greater sort of context, so maybe not to use that word, but I'll just say crazy, weird manifestations. That's what I'll use. And
so just Ritambara Pragya means that level of intellect which knows only truth. And it's said that if one can function on that level, then whatever one wishes to know, one will know with truthfulness and certainty. And also certain things can be accomplished if you can learn to function on that level. So proceed.
Right. So one day, again, in this wonderful cafe that I had dreamed up, as a 17-year-old, it proved again to be sort of the witness of a miracle. I was in the kitchen with my buddy.
The restaurant at the end of the universe.
Exactly. That's how I've always thought of it. The restaurant at the end of the universe. That's
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Exactly. That was always in my mind. I'm at the Magical Mystery School, which owns the restaurant at the end of the universe. But I was just there. It was near closing, and suddenly it just came through me. I was in this. We were in the silence pretty much all day, and then it just emerged out of it right through my mouth. Like wouldn't it be cool if 20 people? We never had a table that large. I think we had an eight-person party once. So that was way beyond any kind of reasonable expectations. Wouldn't it be cool if 20 people just walked in the cafe soon? And then I kept going. I was like, yes, in fact, we will be so quick in the kitchen that we will get everything out within 5 minutes, and we'll beat the drink orders, and we'll have to take them out ourselves. And then we kept going, and then I stopped, and my cook was like, yeah, okay. And then I heard a voice, a phone ring outside. And then the voice of our colleague and waitress and bar person, she said, you better get ready because 20 people are about to come in 5 minutes. And I thought she heard me. I was like, yeah, very funny. She played jokes. I was like, you could hear everything that was said in that kitchen. Very funny, yeah, right. And then she came up, she's like, no. I'm serious, you really better get ready. It's like, oh, okay. And then I couldn't believe it. And so I still couldn't believe it. And then when 20 people streamed in the door, something dropped. That's what it felt like. It was like, boom. It's on. And we were so in the silence that I don't know how we did it. Everything went slow motion. And we had 4 appetizers and 20 plates, hot and cold. And, it was just the most efficiently I've ever done anything in my life.
Zen in the art of
cooking. Yeah. Zen in the art of short order cooking. Right. And we had to carry him out there. It was true because they were at the bar and they're rah, rah, mixing the drinks. And when we took them out to the table, they were shocked.
How fast it was.
Yeah, they got one accusation, a mild accusation
it was already cooked.
You just giving us stuff that you already cooked and you didn't know. It's like, no. And it came out no, we just made this right now. It's a little. It was a lot of intensity coming out, and they were like, "Whoa!"
Cool.
And they gave us a huge tip.
Oh, neat.
They cleaned their plates, and they were like, "Whoa, that was the best, meal we've ever had." And we cleared them out and cleared that, and then it happened again, right after. I was
same day.
Same day. 10 minutes later, after we cleared the table, 10 minutes on a gambler streak or something. Wouldn't it be cool if 18 people came in?
And it happened again. 18.
We sat in the back there because that's the only place we could sit people. Parties of that size was in the back garden.
Right.
And then 18 came, except only then my prognostications were only this time, since we're almost out of prepared food, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. You're going to have to come in here and probably be chopping potatoes ad hoc, and we'll almost clean ourselves out of certain food items. And that's what happened. And we served them with the same sort of bliss, and then I was about to say it again, and then they're like, "We're closed. We're closed." It's like, okay, you're right. We're out of food. We have to restock.
Watch out for what you wish for, huh?
Yeah. Well, it was wonderful, and I think a part of the reason I mention that now is that I had always wanted an experience of that magnitude, which I absolutely would have difficulty rationalizing in a random universe.
Yeah.
I'd wanted something that big to kind of counter, my mind's arguments, and it was given to me that day.
There are a lot of stories in the Vedic literature about this kind of thing where some yogi will make a vow or say such and such is going to happen. And because you know, that Ritambar Pragya, that level of intellect which knows only truth. Because the yogi is so truthful and so in tune with, you know, absolute truth, that it has to happen because he said it had to happen.
Yeah.
And so it happens. And like, there's a lot of cool stories about it. I mean, and sometimes it's like, you know, like the whole Srimad Bhagavatam was based on a story where this yogi was sitting in samadhi, and some king came along and wanted to talk to him or ask him a question or something, and he ignored the king because he was in samadhi, didn't know the king was there. And so the king got really mad and picked up a dead snake with his stick or something and drooped it around the yogi's shoulders. So the yogi's son comes home and sees this insult that has been done to his father, and says, whoever did this is going to die of snake bite in a week. And then his father finally comes out of samadhi and takes the snake off, I guess, and, you know, and kind of comes to realize what his son has said. And it's like, oh no, you said this, it's got to have to happen, you know, because of who you are and the, you know, the level from which you operate. And so the king gets wind of it and he realizes, oh, I was a jerk, I shouldn't have done that. And well, I'm going to die in a week. How can I make good use of this week? And so he gets together, who was it, Narada or somebody, who ended up reciting the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. And the whole thing came out in a week, and it was, the king got enlightened, I guess, and then snake came along and bit him. End of story. But it's the thing about, you know, if you're operating from that level, with that degree of truthfulness in your life and in your consciousness, what you say has to come true.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you left there.
Yeah, left there. Yeah. And I kind of gave myself a hard time after that, truth be told. I mean, I didn't leave with like that many sour grapes, but I did leave with some questions. You know, I certainly, even though I tried never to sort of put anybody up on some sort of idealized pedestal of perfection, I saw the dangers in that. Nevertheless, you know, it was so easy you want that, and to really, you know, want this organization that so much of your young life has been part of to kind of be perfect, and I didn't think it necessarily was. So when I left, I questioned.
You're sort of disillusioned. Or
yeah, I questioned my own experience. And you know, I said like, well, all these things I've experienced, are they just, you know, are they really real or important? Because I would also look at the world and see like, well, I don't know, when I meet people, they don't seem to think, you know, there's necessarily much going on there. So maybe it's not, you know, and maybe, you know, I started so young that I didn't have that much contrast, you know, contrasting experiences to kind of make.
That's an interesting point. Some of us manage to mess ourselves up and get ourselves pretty miserable, and so then we start on the spiritual path, and the contrast is like, oh, such a relief.
Yeah. I feel like I almost kind of like, even though I had some pain and things that were there, all in all, I kind of felt like I had a really good life, and was sort of mainly gently moved into that dimension. And so I was like, well, you know, sometimes I would be jealous a little bit, not jealous, but like a lot of my friends, fellow monks, were like in their 50s or 60s, and they're like, well, I had a job in corporate America and a family, and let me tell you, you know, and I thought, I was really impressed, like, wow, they've lived life, you know, they've had something there, and I haven't, you know, I'm just, you know, what have I been doing? And so I thought, well, I'm going to see what it's like to try to be. Like, I want to be a normal person,
real person,
you know, and I didn't really have many wild oats I really felt inclined to sow or needed to sow, but for me, the wild oat was, I'm going to go to university, you know, like I'm going to go to spend some time with my sister and then go to university and then
get a degree of some kind.
Get a degree of some kind.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, and maybe I'll go, you know, try to see if I can revive some of that old life, and you know, and it turned out that it was ultimately a good exercise in suffering, I think.
Being at the university?
Or trying, I was trying to, the whole trying to sort of deny a lot of what I had experienced, you know, for the purposes of the experiment, actually. You wanted to do the experiment purely, but it was painful. It was like trying to fit into a size 2 shoe after being in a size 10. And so
what did you end up studying?
I ended up with a degree in philosophy.
So you earned it.
I earned it.
Yeah, that must have been rough. I mean, here you are, sort of deeply experienced. and the things that a lot of these philosophies are just kind of groping to
if that,
understand, and skimming around the surface with all kinds of complex theories.
Yeah.
Whereas you've already gone down to the depth of the lake and had the experience. So it must have been a little bit difficult to sit in classrooms with all these people discussing this stuff.
Yeah, it did make me depressed.
And you
for
couldn't
the
just
first
say,
time forever.
"Hey, dudes, I've experienced this. I know the answer,"
No,
because that wouldn't go
that's
over.
not going to do anything. Yeah, you can't do anything. And actually, at one point, I made this sort of like, and I'm kind of a talker. I'm gregarious. I like to talk with people, but I sort of decided I'm not going to tell anybody anything about me unless they solicit.
Yeah.
And I figured, well, someone's going to ask me, and I realized how uncurious people seem to be. Like I realized how. When I would talk with people, I love to get to know people, and I want to probe and question and see what they're about.
I'm that way too.
Touch their essence.
Start asking them questions right away.
Yeah. I want to experience people at their essence, at the bottom of the lake, where in that place of unity. But I found I was a little bit maybe naive, because I found that nobody has time for anything but everything that's going on in their head.
Interesting.
And I thought in university that maybe people would be curious and be joyful and be, if not conscious, be like wild and free enough to be fluid and kind of exploring, And
Have you ever noticed that there's a lot of people, perhaps the majority, who, you'll be having a conversation with them, and you're interested, you're asking them questions, you're listening, you're really getting their story, and then you start saying something about yourself, and it's like, okay, well, I gotta go. I'll see you later.
Yes. Exactly. I'm not confused by that, but I certainly found it strange when I first encountered that, in people. Yeah.
It's like they get off on talking about themselves. They're not really interested in anyone else.
So I kind of wore a costume. I decided I'm going to wear a costume.
Yeah.
I'm going to wear this costume of Thomas Ward Howell again, and see, and it was ill-fitting at the time. It could have probably been better fitting.
What'd you do? 2 years of it or something?
No, I did. I got 5 years.
Wow.
Because I tried to do architecture at the start, because that was a lifelong passion.
Okay.
And then I realized I do not want to sleep under a drafting table and produce dreary cardboard models of ugly modernist structures, because I had a different aesthetic than the.
So you went into the. You and I were in the airport yesterday. And I was saying, imagine the amount of planning it takes to build a place like this.
Yeah.
We're in the Phoenix airport. It's just mind-boggling. Every little wire has to be taken into account, and every little placement of every little thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a tangent, but it's something I've often wondered about when I look at big buildings or bridges or anything else. The whole science of being able to do that.
Look at a termite mound.
Yeah.
So complex, and they're just doing it, or beaver dam.
Kind of, yeah.
We're just doing it with a different.
Now with the termites, no one termite knows what's going on in its entirety, but somehow they work as a collective.
Like as a network.
The mound gets built.
Yeah.
That's an interesting
Wonderful,
thing.
incredible structures.
And that's also true of man-made attempts. I mean, they say no one knows how we got to the moon, because it was too much information for any one person to figure out. But through the collaboration in the proper way of all these people, we got there.
Yeah.
According to most people. we were talking about how certain people don't
I agree.
think it was staged in Hollywood. But anyway, okay, so you did this 5 years of academic stuff.
Yeah, and then
Got out of there.
Yeah, I was just cooking with the suffering near the end, and I got to the point where I started waking up, and at night not being able to breathe, and
So stifled by the whole experience.
something, and so I went to the doctors. I was like, I got to be sick and dying, right, doc? Like, do I have cancer? Like they're checking me out. You do not have cancer. It's like, are you sure? Like, we're pretty damn sure.
You had sleep apnea or something.
Yeah, or I was getting to the point where I would have panic attacks in the night, and there was some points where I would kind of go into some of those NDE spaces I had before, and I was kind of sort of familiar with them. Actually, it's kind of like in that movie Gladiator. I would see a door, like an etheric kind of door, and I would start walking to it and leave my body, and I'd be like, yeah, I can do this. And then I kind of had some sort of voice talk to me and say, like, you actually could. You could leave right now. You've accomplished a great deal, and you could leave it at here, and that'd be just fine. Or you could stay around and
go on Buddha at the gas pump.
Go on Buddha at the gas pumps 6 years from now. Not on the horizon, but or you could stay around, and you're going to have to dust off the old armor. That made sense to my brain. Get back on the horse and kind of get back into your old shape, and let the whatever barnacles you've accumulated come off, and live and be of service. And I was like, well, let me think about that. Yes, I will do that. I'm gonna. And right when I made that choice, that stopped happening.
Yeah.
And
That's interesting. And just as in NDEs, how very often some guides or something come to the
Yeah.
people and tell them they have this choice.
right.
I tend to believe that something like that happened to you, even though you weren't dying, but that
No.
some kind of guardian angel or spiritual guide or whatever these things are was sort of talking to you there.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of out of my body, and like I said, it was like in that. I don't know who's seen Gladiator. He's always walking towards this door.
I don't
and it's-
remember the movie. Was that like with Russell Crowe?
Yeah, that's right. Russell Crowe.
I remember seeing the movie, and I think he got stabbed, but he
did.
still had to fight the fight, even though he'd been stabbed and he won. But
Throughout the film, he kept having visions of the other side, where his family was on the other side. His dead family was on the other side of the gate, and he's longed to go there.
yeah,
And so,
that was a great movie, and I like Russell Crowe. But I figured anyway.
Yeah. Anyways, enough of Gladiator. How did I got that into a Buddha at the gas pump conversation? Score.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I made that choice, it was like stuff started falling off.
Yeah.
And there was a center, and I just needed to finish at university, and it must have been a week later I met my wife.
Huh.
And the whole time in Portland I was thinking, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
And when I got out of the monastery, I felt like, I'd had all these things that I thought were going to take me 3 lifetimes. I've experienced all this. I'm sure a bus is just going to come and kill me soon.
So you went to university in Portland?
In Portland, yeah. And so, because that was the nearby town, that's where my sister lived, and I, decided, let's just get going as fast as I can. And years later, a week after I made my decision to sort of stay, I met my wife, and she had the, I don't know how to describe it, the energetic signature of that forward path all about her. It was so clear that, as part of like coming back in here, she's there.
Cool.
And so in so many ways she helped me just by being herself kind of shed these barnacles and come back to life and come back to my path. And coming back, I felt like, truth be told, I was able to come back in a much deeper sense than I had left off.
Yeah.
Mainly because before I would often feel this sort of creeping kind of sense of judgmental insularity, the sense that that the teaching is like the people outside the walls of the teaching.
Yep.
Even if you felt one, there was a sense, even a very subtle sense of like people were somehow less than, and it was barbarian. And when I would feel that strongly,
ignorant, unwashed masses
Yeah,
who
yeah,
don't
yeah.
get what we get.
Right. And when that would come through my nervous system,
Yeah.
I would feel myself like talk or act from that space.
Yeah.
I would want to go and take a shower with Scotch-Brite
I
because
know what you mean. I've been through phases like that.
Yeah.
I saw this conversation with a couple of fundamentalist preachers recently because there's this big controversy because one of them was trying to raise $40 million for a new jet or something. And they had this conversation with the two of them, and one of them saying, yeah, you got to have a Gulfstream such and such, because otherwise you have to fly commercial, and you have to sit in a big tin can with a bunch of demons.
I remember that. Yeah, like that. Yeah.
I was thinking, obviously he had gone farther down that rabbit hole, but
I think so.
His perspective was that anybody who's not a fundamentalist such and such in his ilk was a demon.
That's right.
And you start looking at people like that around in society, and what a terrible way to see the world.
Yeah.
As opposed to seeing them all as your brothers and sisters and people that you can feel love for.
Right. And I feel like maybe I had sort of screwed up enough and been enough of an idiot that like it was just like there's a softness in my heart, and a softness in my gut, and I was like, okay, and that was gone, what something that had bothered me in my first tenure as a monk. And then I was like, okay, that's great. And so I've gradually I didn't know I was going to be meditation teaching again, because I still had a lot of, regardless of any objections or whatever, I still had a lot of respect for doing things properly, and I wanted to make sure that I would teach from a very good place. But as time wore on, it became gradually more apparent that was going to be part of my life again, and that I ought to be doing that. And I started teaching teaching folks for donation. I had to have some guinea pigs, like, you're going to be my guinea pig here. Are you cool with that? Because I might suck, And then they're like, oh, that was great. You should go back to doing that, professionally again.
So that's what you've been doing. You've been teaching meditation.
Yeah.
And you also are somewhat of a gifted astrologer.
Yeah.
I haven't sampled your wares in that department yet, but I've heard you talk about it a little bit. And as I gather it, I mean, we don't have the time to really go into justification of astrology
God,
and how it might work and whether or
10
not
hours.
it's valid and all that business. But you do it, and you sort of bring intuitive skills to it as
Yeah,
well. So you're
yeah.
not just going by what a regular astrologer might do.
Right. Yeah, it's quite different. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Neat. And your wife is in Japan teaching English as
That's
a
right.
second language, and you two of you kind of go back and forth. And so, we've kind of swung between subjective experiences you have had during your life to objective external events
Right.
and things you did. And so, let's take another swing toward the subjective
Right.
at this point. And, what is your experience these days? Do you feel like you've attained some awakening or liberation or anything else? Do you still have all that subtle perception stuff? Do you feel like you're still very much a work in progress in terms of the evolution of your subjective experience? And, what's going on in that way?
Of course, the latter thing I think has always been the case.
Yeah.
And I would hate to ever think that there would be a sense of doneness or end, because, that's always ongoing.
Yeah.
All the wonders that are out there to experience. Certainly, coming back afterward, it didn't take too long. There were some rough patches to get the newly encrusted barnacles kind of off, and maybe some deeper stuff that I never really touched in the beginning. A lot of stuff that was much more, more visceral, more like heart level and gut level type stuff. More, like I'd never quite relaxed enough to get that stuff out. And so there was a process of having that clear out, and after that, there was a sense of just being able to relax more fundamentally into that sense of consciousness, not only being this kind of like witnessing place or this kind of thing I could see kind of like, I don't know, behind me. That was how the words I would often use, but a sense of it getting relaxed enough to like feel it pop up in Rick Archer, or in the chair, or in the rocks.
So it kind of went from witnessing to unity more.
I never kind of all taxonomies seem to be imperfect and a little bit loose, and so I kind of,
they're just words and not very imprecise.
Different.
Not very precise, but
yeah. So I might say that that's a part of the ocean that I seem to be visiting much more frequently than say 12 years ago or 14 years ago, and so that seems to be a more consistent experience, and actually along with that, almost at the same time came this sort of explosion of what it's often called celestial perception, or some people call it psychic stuff, or
Was it different than the stuff you had when you were a kid when you were seeing spooks? Was it more of but there's a difference between astral and celestial, right?
Right.
Maybe you can explain that difference and explain the difference in your experience between the two.
I would say there were a lot of similarities, but much more precise or exacting were the experiences that I've had in the last 2 years than as compared to maybe the stuff I had as a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old. There's much more of a kind of, I don't know how to quite describe it. A kind of a golden light underneath
More
everything.
subtle.
More subtle.
Yeah.
And there was almost often a sense of, and not everybody gets this or how I'll describe it, but a sense of like almost being able to like investigate different stories of a great building. If this universe had a lot of different strata.
In my father's
levels.
house, there are many mansions.
That's right. And kind of going to them naturally, and kind of a sense of kind of having my being sort of expand out, and then every once in a while I'll start to notice like, hey, what's this room I'm in? I haven't noted this one before, but here it is, and kind of looking around, and there have been interesting experiences with kind of like going up the top of my head, and kind of being kind of like a golden door up there where people place the crown chakra, and kind of going up this long sort of channel, and there are beings up there, and they're kind of golden beings, and kind of saying hi to them, and when I look sort of horizontally, this is getting really weird, I apologize, but when I look horizontally, there are kind of worlds. There are like worlds that these different beings with different energetic signatures that these different beings kind of exist on, and so those things have been in some ways spontaneous and mundane. That's been I would use the word mundane. They've been almost as normal as me kind of like having a memory
Yeah.
or thinking about this or that. And so that has been an interesting feature. They have not kind of like slammed me and made me incapacitated or anything like that. They've just been almost like being ushered into or invited into exploring more and more of
Yeah.
what's happening right here.
It's interesting the way Marshy laid it out was get self-realization established as a foundation, and then begin to develop the capacity to experience the full range of the relative, gross to subtle. And I remember him saying one time, he said, when you open up to that subtle perception, you discover that a world of beings is there.
Yeah.
You can say worlds of beings,
Worlds,
perhaps.
yeah.
And, they're sort of right here, but just sort of in a different dimension from our gross world.
Right.
Right? It's not like you're going off to Alpha Centauri or something to
Right.
tune into them.
No.
There's just all these strata. It's almost like to take an example. I mean, this goes in terms of big and small, but you have your body, and it's meat on this level, and you go down to the molecular level, and it doesn't look so much like meat anymore. It's these little molecules. Even on the cellular level, it looks very different than this level. Then you go down to the DNA level or the molecular level, and then the atomic level, and each one of those worlds, as it were, is on its own level would be unrecognizable by any other worlds. It's so dissimilar, and yet those are the building blocks of this world.
Yeah.
So the whole subtle realms thing, I suppose. I mean, you can speak to it better than I, but I suppose you would find it. Do you find it? Have you found it to be very different in certain respects than our conventional world, or are there differences and similarities?
Well, in some ways, I might contextualize it differently. It's almost like it has kind of become part of my conventional world.
It's true. Yeah, good. Well put.
It's more like my
like you've incorporated it.
Yeah. It's more like my definition of conventional world has had to sort of expand and accommodate this new sort of types of data, if you will.
So you're functioning in several worlds at once.
Yes, I mean, often that's the case. Sometimes it'll be the case of kind of like being a more classically physical sort of experience, and digging a hole in the garden. But just as equally, sometimes I'll find myself doing some very physical work, like working on a house or planting a garden. And then there's, good Lord, the plant is talking to me, and I start to sometimes phase into different time periods, and my clothing will look different, but it's never been too much to sort of distract me from being able to function and appear as if I'm functioning in just the same manner as anybody else.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been how it's gone.
So to take another example, perhaps, and I'll just catch you unawares with this one. We're here in Sedona, Arizona, and Sedona is notorious for having all kinds of vortexes and all kinds of woo-woo taking place. So have you noticed anything here in Sedona since we arrived that I probably haven't noticed?
Well,
believe me, I haven't noticed.
I don't like to assume anything, but now you've taken care of my fear of assumption. But,
don't. I mean.
Yeah. Well, besides a certain sense of feeling that there are these columns around where probably people reckon there are vortexes. I don't know where people reckon they are, but I see things. There's a sense. I've seen large tracts of lines of gold that seem to carry energy and information, kind of connecting these points, and have a sense of subtle beings walking around in town, who aren't discarnate spirits, but seem to be of a different sort of
like celestial beings,
like celestials, different sort of function in the universe, and it seems to actually be quite a city here, a celestial city.
Interesting. So kind of like celestial city superimposed on a terrestrial city.
Kind of a terrestrial city superimposed on, the other
way around.
Both. Yeah, could say it either way. Yeah. I had the same experience with Mount Shasta. I actually, funnily enough, I visited both of these cities about 13 years after my last visit or so. Yeah. And so coming back for the second round has been a much different experience as far as all that sort of stuff goes.
That's cool.
But yeah, I can see why human beings want to put beautiful, stone houses in this environment, because there's something interesting in the sauce here.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, just as an aside here, but related to our point, all these records in the religious literature and all the artwork about angels and you get it in Christianity, you get it in Buddhism, and Tibetan Buddhism especially, all these big fancy murals with all these beings with various appearances and all that stuff. It's not just folklore, it's not just myth.
Yeah.
People have these experiences and probably did their best to put them into some kind of graphic form. But it's kind of almost a record of, humanity's familiarity with or acquaintance with these subtle realms. So if you kind of take it in that light and not just brush it off as some kind of artistic imagination, gives you a deeper appreciation of these traditions and of life itself.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so anything else you want to say that I'm not thinking to get you to say?
Yeah. Well, there are certainly more campfire stories, as it were, but in the files. But it seems like we've probably brought enough out right here.
And so I suppose that if people want to get in touch with you and get involved with you or learn something from you, it seems to me there are two main things.
That's right.
Unless you want to go cook in a restaurant someplace, there is the the meditation instruction thing,
that's
which
right.
I imagine you'd be happy to travel around and do,
Oh,
or do you do it over Skype?
I
or what do
love
you do?
traveling around to do it. And,
Yeah.
and I've never really done it over the internet. I've done it in a that's another big no-no for my organization.
Right.
But I've done it in a few cases recently, and found that people have had quite good experiences with it that way. I was skeptical.
I imagine it might be a little nicer though if people can get a group together and you could go and be with the group.
That's optimal.
Really?
Yeah.
So there's that, and people could. I'll link to your websites, and they could get in touch with you and invite you to come here and there to do that.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole astrology thing. I guess you still like to do that professionally.
Oh, I love doing that. Yeah.
And you have a website dedicated to
I
that,
do,
right? In which you describe how you do it a little bit
right.
more than you're saying this morning at breakfast, like how much time you put in preparation for an astrological reading. You want to just quickly buzz through that so people get a flavor?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I really roll the sleeves up for it, you know, and so I'll do these in person or over Zoom or Skype or whatever video thing we use. I do a 90-minute reading with the clients, and then I mean, usually as I get better, my preparation time probably will shorten, but I like to put in at least have 2 to 3 hours available for my own preparation of the chart and looking into the person intuitively before the reading itself.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of
3.5 to 4.5 hours you're spending on each one.
Yeah.
And how much do you charge for that?
$150 US.
Hear that? That's a pretty good deal.
I hope so. I try to make it a good deal. Want to be accessible.
So it's like less than $50 an hour. It's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
And you were saying to me, and I appreciate this, that you just didn't want to have it be all about money. You intentionally charged less than the going rate for such things, but not because you were trying to compete with other astrologers, just because that's your mindset.
Yeah, and if I become so busy that I well known or something that I have to raise my prices, I'll try to do that as moderately as I can. And I always, whether it's been meditation or anything else, I always have sliding scale options. I always put that on my websites. Like if you don't have 2 dimes to rub together, if you really want to do this, I really want to find a way to make that happen so that it works for you. So same with the meditation, and I think I charge a very reasonable rate for that, like $300 for I think a very a weekend
involved
class,
whole thing.
Very involved class, and I also kind of go out of my way, to be available after the class as follow-up as much as possible. And I typically never charge for that, so yeah.
Great. Okay, so I think that gives people a glimpse
Yeah.
of the Ishtar Thomas phenomenon. So thanks, I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're able to be here with me in Sedona. We're going to go do some hiking over the next couple days and have a potluck dinner with some friends and a bunch of other stuff before we go flying off back to our respective cities.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you, Rick.
Sure.